Good evening. Welcome to the City of Dublin Board of Zoning Appeals. You can join the meeting in person at 5555 Perimeter Drive and also access the meeting via the live stream on the company's website. We welcome public participation, including public comments on cases. The meeting procedure for each case this evening will begin with staff presentation, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to make a presentation. The board will then have the opportunity to ask clarifying questions, first of staff, then of the applicant, prior to hearing public comments. And finally, the board will deliberate each case. We have roll, please.
Mr. Deschler?
Here.
Mr. Nye?
Here.
Ms. Herbert?
Here.
Mr. Clower?
Here.
We'll move to the acceptance of documents and approval of meeting minutes. Do we have a motion to accept the documents into record and approve the January 27, 2022 meeting minutes?
Motion. Second.
Roll, please.
Ms. Herbert?
Yes.
Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Mr. Clower?
Yes.
We'll now move to the swearing in of witnesses and staff. Anyone attending to address the board on cases this evening, please stand, raise your right hand, and answer in the affirmative. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony to this board? Thank you. What? We should. We'll wait, address it. But thanks. We'll have two cases this evening. First case is the two residents at 7605 Bel Air Avenue. That's case number 21-143V in respect to a non-area use or non-use area variance. Staff presentation.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, if anyone that's not speaking could turn off their microphones, it will focus the camera feed on me or you, whichever. Thank you. So good evening. The application before the board tonight is a non-use area variance for the two residents. This application was provided to the City of Dublin for the construction of an accessory structure that exceeds the maximum size permitted by code. Just a brief description of the site. The site is approximately 2.7 acres in size. It's located on the south side of Bel Air Avenue. It's just east of Dublin Road, which is the primary intersection for the property. The site is zoned R1, which is a residential zoning district that is actually incorporated around the surrounding communities. There is several residential communities beyond this site. Donegal Cliffs is to the north. The most interesting feature to the east is the Scioto River. There are large residential lots that are to the south and equally residential lots contained within the same subdivision to the west. The site is developed with a single-family residential structure, and you can see the shape of the site. In comparison to the surrounding area, the site is actually equal in size. If you look along the river, the elongated properties, all of those properties are approximately 2.5 acres in size. Of course, they vary, but the average size of those properties are 2.5 acres in size, which is equivalent to the applicant's site. Further to the west, they do get smaller within the subdivision and decrease to 1 acre in size. This is just describing the site. It's located within a subdivision called Dublin Estates. You You can see the original plat contained 19 lots when it was originally recorded. The applicant's sites are Lot 5 and 6 of the subdivision, which have been combined to increase the size of the site. And again, you can see the shape and sizes of the lots surrounding the applicant's property. Just a brief description of what's contained on the site. Again, the applicant's site has frontage along Bel Air Avenue. The site does contain approximately 4,000 square foot residential structure to the center of the site. There's an existing pool that's located west of the applicant's site. And the proposal that you're reviewing tonight is for the construction of a 2,400 square foot detached structure that would be somewhat southwest of the existing structure. It's indicated in green. The detached structure is approximately 40 feet from the rear property line and approximately 70 feet from the side property line, just to give you an idea of what the separation for the structure is. In terms of code restrictions, I don't believe the Board of Zoning Appeals has reviewed an accessory structure that exceeds the permitted size, so I wanted to give some brief description. The requirements are a formula-based code. The square footage starts at 1,000 square feet and gives increments of 250 square feet for every acre thereof. For the applicant site, that allows them 1,500 square feet. They're requesting 2,400 square feet. They do have an existing shed, and so the variance for which they're requesting is approximately 1,020 square feet in size. Again, just trying to give the Board of Zoning Appeals some indication of what accessory structures and the regulations pertaining to accessory structures are intended to do. And this is a language from the zoning code. Accessory structures shall be permitted to be in association with a principal use, which means essentially they can't be a singular use on the site. It also states that permitted structures shall be subordinate and proportional to the area in which they're located. And specifically for larger residential lots, it states that accessory structures shall be proportionate to the size of the property, so that there's an equal balance between the principal structure, the property, and the accessory structure. Although architecture is not an element in which the board reviews, we wanted to give some information that the applicant provided in terms of what the detached structure would look like. It is a fairly, I would say, four-structured building. There are two elevations that have overhead doors. There's two structures that have pedestrian-oriented doors, and there's windows throughout the building. In terms of the criteria, not only for the board, but for the public's consumption, there are review criteria in which we review non-use area variances. In the first three criteria, all three are required to be met. The first is that there's special conditions associated with the site itself. We did note that the site does have mature vegetation and it's equivalent in size to the surrounding lots in the community. We did not find a correlation between these natural features and the request essentially being an accessory structure larger than what's permitted. That would conclude that the criteria is not met. The second criteria is action or inaction of the applicant. The applicants have based this proposal on their desire to accommodate some recreational space for themselves, and so therefore the creation of this request is based on the applicant's request. Finally, of the three criteria, whether the purpose or the intent of this regulation would be to the detriment, the applicant's need for recreational space would, sorry, I lost my train of thought. The applicant's need for this space is directly not connected to the residence, and they could decrease the request by eliminating some of the square footage that they're proposing. I apologize. Of the second tier of requirements, 2 of the 4 requirements are required to be met. The first one is that there's special privileges. In other words, if the board were to approve the variance, would we be conferring special privileges to the applicant? Our analysis of the code bases the formula in which we determine a maximum square footage based on the size of the property. In other words, there's incremental increases as the property increases in size. Therefore, if the applicants were to be able to construct a building that exceeds the square footage, we do in fact believe that they're provided a privilege that we wouldn't provide to other applicants. The second is that the application is not recurring in nature. The Board of Zoning Appeals has not heard a request, at least to my awareness, in the last 10 years for this type of request, so it is not recurrent in nature, not something that we would need to address by a code modification. The third is basically impacting the delivery of governmental services. There's nothing affiliated with the request that would prohibit delivery service to the site, so that actually is met. And in terms of other methods available, we do believe that there's actually 2 options that we've explored. One would be decreasing the size to meet the code. The second is providing the size of building that they're requesting, but attach it with a breezeway. That would allow the structure to be considered a full structure, and it would no longer be applicable to the standards that we're speaking of tonight. Making these determinations, we do recommend to the Board of Zoning Appeals disapproval of this particular variance request. We do believe that it doesn't meet the first 3 criteria of non-use variance, and it would be disapproval to section 153.074B2E. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I do know the applicants, and I believe perhaps their construction team may be with us to speak tonight.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. Real quick, just a clarification before I'll defer to my colleagues here to ask questions. Can you go back to real quick on the prior page? You have on number 2, criteria met. Are you meaning that's not met?
It's not recurrent in nature, so it is met.
Okay, because the staff report that you provided indicates that it's not met.
It should be met.
Okay. So just to be clear, 2 of the 4 within section 153.231, capital H2 are met.
That's true. So we would want to focus on the first 3 criteria.
Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any questions for our staff? We'll probably come back, Tammy. I do just want to clarify one thing. You had said that there hasn't been this type of request that you can recall in the past 10 years. Do we know if there has been one under this code section in the history of the board?
I wouldn't say there hasn't been a request. I know that it's not a typical request. I'll say that.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so can we have a representative? Go ahead, Robin.
For the calculation that it's requiring you do for the accessory structures, do you have a copy of that easily accessible? I'm wondering how that additional shed, obviously you said that it subtracts 120 square feet from the total approximately 1,750 square feet, leaving them 1,500 square feet remaining. I would like to see that to make sure that it's not for a single standing structure in the combination of the 2, or compared to the combination of multiple standing structures.
So let me clarify. The applicants are permitted 1,500 square feet in totality. So you would subtract 120 square feet from that amount. From
my understanding, it's 1,000 square feet plus 250 square feet per acre. They're on a 2.5 acre lot, which means they'd have approximately 1750. 2.7 acre lot, so even a little bit more than that. So like 1800-ish ballpark. And then I think what you said in your planning report is that the additional freestanding structure, the shed, is 120 square feet, which removes that from the consideration for the extra space they have, which is what bumps them down to around 1,500 or so, rather than they're allowed to have a freestanding structure of up to around, again, 1,800 square feet.
Okay. So for the first acre, they're granted 1,000 square feet. And then for every acre thereof, including fractions, they get 250 square feet. So
Okay.
you
So I was
start,
double counting the first acre.
you start with 1,000, then you add 250, and they're at 2.7, so you add another 250, so it's 1,500 in totality. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you.
And that's total,
Mike, put your mic on.
sorry, that's total for all accessory structures,
That's true.
not each, right?
No, total.
Where on the property do you have a picture of where the existing shed is?
Honestly, I'd like to defer to the applicant because I tried to dissect it from either my site visit and/or the ortho, and honestly, I didn't see it. I believe it's internal to the site, but I would defer to the applicant for conclusion.
I'll ask them then. Thank you.
Okay, if we could have the applicant step forward, or applicant's representative. And it may be easier if you both want to come up, because there may be questions that'll ping back and forth. Okay. And then whoever's going to be speaking first, if you could introduce yourself.
Good. Elias to wife Kristen too. Thank you for having us and appreciate the time. To answer your question, ma'am, where the shed is located, I don't know how to point it out. It'd be on the corner of where the structure would be, and we would be willing to knock that down as it's pretty decrepit.
In the southwestern corner?
Other side.
Okay.
Tammy, real quick, can you pull up the one picture that was submitted within the applicant's statement? There's a... Do you have that?
Show that.
Okay,
I didn't include the actual picture.
that's fine. The actual, can you pull the first slide, I think. The, whatever, that one probably works, right? This one. Yeah, so I think, I don't think that's it. I think it's in the,
That's their patio, the little white blob.
It's just a small dot. Yeah.
It's only 120 square foot,
Okay.
only 120 square feet. I can't imagine it's
Yeah.
probably in
So
that
it's
tree area near the pool.
connected to the driveway?
It's basically connected to the driveway, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
okay. Right. All right, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, so again, thank you and appreciate the time. You know, we've been residents of Dublin for 5 years most recently and 35 years plus. And, you know, this property was something that we moved back to because it was a unique and really interesting property in itself. A lot of the things that we wanted to do growing back up into this area was to grow into this household. As you can see, we have quite a few kids, and we wanted to give them the opportunity to play and exercise and have a place. The house does not have a basement, which is kind of a unique situation for us because they run around the house next to us all the time, which makes it a little bit different. But long story short, we wanted to build a structure for them to have an area to spend their time, grow up in, and play sports in. Some of the things that don't fit the criteria are based on, you know, the we don't want to set a new precedent for Dublin, being from here. We understand that it's a important thing for us to keep code. But I think our property is much different than any other property that I've ever seen in this space. It's not rectangular. It's on a 18-foot grade. Where we want to put the structure is completely off the road. Our house is literally a fishbowl, so you've got streets on both sides. So we really had it tucked away from anywhere else. We've considered attaching it to the house, but unfortunately, everything would be on the front side where every road and every person driving by would see it, which we didn't think that would be aesthetically pleasing to our neighbors. The size of it is really based on us. We were both volleyball players here in town and at Ohio State, and so to fit a volleyball court in there, it needs to be at a minimum 40 by 60 to be safe. And so our kids, with the hopes that they could follow their parents' footsteps, we wanted to have the size of a court that they could play in. So, I mean, that's the genesis and the reason that we wanted to have it at that size. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that didn't meet the criteria. It is 2.7 acres, but it's an odd 2.7. It's not your typical 2.7 acres. And again, it's backed off of the road. And we've asked our neighbors if it would bother them, and I think they all commented publicly, and some of them are here. And so I don't know if they said yes or no, but my inclination was that it didn't matter to them.
Do you have any questions?
So,
Can we go back to the slide that has the proposed structure, the one that's kind of a plot plan, I guess?
It's the next one
I
after
think
that.
it's out, the next one. Where is it? That showed the proposed, didn't you
You had
have
your
it?
little like boxes in there.
Yeah. That one. So, okay. Just so I'm clear, it looks like the driveway comes in kind of to the east of the structure.
Correct.
And then, and that little L shape that comes down, that's the garage?
That's the garage and our bedroom.
Okay. So that you're not able to do like a breezeway through to that corner, to the corner of your house or over to the garage or anything? I guess that would be the front of your house. Would that be the front of your house? Where it says exterior house, that's your front door
That's the
probably.
front door to our house, yeah. So you can build right there.
And there's no side door that goes out to the pool?
There is a side door that goes out to the
Could you
pool.
do a breezeway to the side door to the pool,
It
the house near the pool area? Because is my understanding, if he attaches this by some breezeway, this can be 2,400 square feet. Correct. This is a moot point here. Correct.
I think your question is there any way you can attach it to your house? Because then you get to bypass all this. Is that the way to put it?
It'd be about a 50-foot breezeway, right?
I would think that that's
Yeah.
about where we'd be.
And you can't move it closer to the house?
Where it's sloped down, so there's a humongous pine tree that I wouldn't want to cut down, as it's probably 75 years old. That reaches over our house. I think that'd be challenging to take that down.
What's attached to the house actually mean, Tammy?
It means it's part of the primary structure, and it's no longer applicable to the criteria for accessory structures. They would only be applicable to lot coverage at that point and setbacks, which, based on the location of their house, there's adequate space.
So what is the minimum structure? Obviously, a breezeway would be like ideal. This is absolutely connected to the house. What is the minimum structure that would be required for it to be connected to a house?
Do you mean what qualifies for a breezeway?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it has to be either a roofed structure, or a completely enclosed structure that you can, but you have to be able to enter one portion of the house to the other. It has to be completely accessible.
But does it have to have walls to all sides if it's covered? So they could have basically a covered sidewalk connecting the house to the building, and that gets the exception then.
Yeah, depending on structural components that would need support. And we could help you work through if that's something that would be a consideration.
And Brian Roby with Pebble Construction, if I would understand that, then we would be able to probably do 4,000 square feet or more if that were the desire to do a breezeway and then enlarge the building.
Yeah, you'd only be limited to meeting setbacks and lot coverage, which again, I can't even, you would have ample space to do that.
I was just trying to.
Yeah, no, just something to think about.
Maybe
There's a way you can have a lot more without having to deal with any of these constraints.
Yeah. But it seems for the properties in the area, the twos were really working hard at trying to define the size of the building so that it was functional for them and satisfying to the neighbors. And if you would use that line of reasoning, well, we can add anything up and put 10,000 square foot attached to the house, I don't think the neighbors would be satisfied with that rendition and attachment, you know.
And there were, I believe, 7 public comments from neighbors that were all in favor of this addition being built. There wasn't a single negative comment, so it seems like you did your job well in convincing the neighbors, and they seem to agree with the aesthetics and everything.
Yeah, and I know we're not necessarily in the discussion portion, but the problem I have with that, as great as that is, one of our criteria that we have to meet is not, do your neighbors agree? It's helpful to us to know that, but it doesn't get us around the requirements that we have.
Just as a note, the drawings, it's difficult to do, justice to a flat view drawings. But still, the exterior finish, as far as the wood siding and all, is what's on the house. It's not like they've tried to skirt that issue. It is a metal roof, could be shingled if it had to be, but, that's the kind of thing that they've tried to be functional and add value to the neighborhood.
So I just want to read this just so it's on the record. So for it to be considered attached, it says that it has an attached roof with similar design to the principal structure, permits access between the principal structure and the addition, either internally or under roof, and/or a common wall with the principal structure. And/or is the key part of that last sentence.
So the similar roof structure is, if you have a metal roof, you'd have to have a slanted metal roof. You can't have a, tarped awning over top of it, right?
Yep.
Of course not.
Or, anything shade roof.
And similar to that note, even if it remains as a detached structure, there's equal architectural standards that make it a requirement that it's compatible to the primary structure. All of these regulations are intended to ensure that a detached structure seems cohesive with the site.
My wife was saying, Discovery GIS may give you a better view of the topography of the land. Is that what that is? Okay.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of, there's no more proper spot for it than where it's located. We're already, recessing or placing it in the ground about 56 inches on one side so that the profile, everything would look lower. Doesn't make it more convenient, it just makes it lower for everybody's view.
You talked about, just focusing on the first three criteria that we kind of have to address. Special conditions, can you talk about why you disagree with the city on the special conditions for this criteria not being met? I know that you mentioned that this home has no basement, which does make it a little bit more unusual, but you said there was some grading issues. Can you talk more about the topography of the site?
Yeah, I think if I remember the numbers correctly, is it 18-foot drop from one end to the other? So I think we're just trying to say it's different than other properties in the area. There's a pretty significant drop from one end to the other because it's on the high side of the river. So the river's on the side. And so basically how the land looks, you've got our house on the one end and everything else kind of flows down. So that's, I think, a little bit different than most properties in town. It's not a square lot, again, or a rectangular lot. It's quite ovalish, to say the least, which makes it much different. I don't know if there's any other properties. I mean, at the end of the day, I want to be unique to Dublin, meaning I want to be that it's not something else someone can come in here and say, oh, our house is exactly the same, right? Which I don't think it is. So I think those are some distinguishing factors that would make it different than all the other houses. This was, I think, a neighborhood that was here before Dublin was. And so a lot of the rules were regulated for where my parents live, things like that. So
There is a significant amount of drainage that comes around the property and under their driveway. And so we were trying to avoid doing anything that impeded or stopped anyone else's water flow off of their properties, even though it would come on this property.
it's not, it's the square area. Yeah. Like what is that, the west side?
I mean, but by pure design, it's going to drain towards the river. You see all the vegetation along both sides of the river. That's indications that there's a saturation of water, which again it's typical, but it looks like the center portion of your site to the north is the higher of the topography.
What's the one neighbors? They have a massive attached structure. Do you know what that is?
They're the Guts, which is 2 houses down from us. It's a basketball court.
How big is that? Do you know?
It's a great question. I don't know the measurements of it. I know it's a full-size half-court basketball court plus a gym on the end, and it's attached to their house.
Attached.
It's attached.
And just for the board's edification, there's a lot of if-then scenarios with what is equated to the square footage. Any type of courtyard area, whether it's basketball, volleyball, whatever, that would equate to the number of accessory structures, but it doesn't factor into the square footage. So that would be slightly different than this request. And then to that point, the square to the northern part of the lot, is it an ice rink or?
No, it's a beach volleyball court.
Okay,
That was there before we moved in.
okay.
It's just covered then.
It's covered 90% of the time, unfortunately, because of the weather, but it's a nice court.
Hey, Tammy, I mean, I'm trying to think of an area where there's a massive detached structure, in Dublin that would match anywhere, even 1,000 to 1,500 square feet.
There's a couple barns like on.
Yeah. There are 2 barns right off of Kaufman Road. There's the one by the roundabout that's owned by the councilman, and then there's one like
Oh, yeah, I voted
halfway
against that.
down the road across from kind of the kindergarten. There's that big barn in the backyard as well.
I was thinking, I can recall a couple lots along, there's a lot, because the lots are so big along the river, I recall a couple that have a breezeway connecting basically a detached structure with livable space to the primary structure. I couldn't say how far those breezeways are, but I can recall a couple that qualify under that.
But the breezeway would make it different, so it's not the same.
The breezeway would make it part of the principal structure, so it would be one structure, and they would not be required to meet these standards, which is somewhat where we were steering the proposal.
Yeah, 7051 Kaufman Road, the accessory structure, it actually has two accessory structures, and the primary accessory structure is like twice the size of the actual house. So there's precedent for large accessory structures, but I also don't know which came first, if the barn came first or if they were grandfathered in.
Just for clarification, is it attached with a breezeway, or is it? It's
No, there's a
detached?
large asphalt driveway in between the three different structures.
The other thing that we found commonly when properties are developed in the township, they tend to have more detached structures and larger detached structures, and then they annex into the city. But you can usually see those on the perimeter of the city's boundaries.
Mr. Cloud, do you know how much acreage they had on that 75?
Can you say that again?
What was the acreage at that?
I'm not sure. Eyeballing it, it's definitely less than your property, but I don't have any facts or figures.
The closest large building to them would be just toward Dublin on at the roundabout.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, is that the same structure that he's?
no, there's the one near the high school. That's a big blue barn.
The other comment I might make to the board, and the reason why we didn't include use as a large discussion point in our analysis, is that was intentional, because once the applicants leave the premises or sell the property, the use could potentially change. And so those are considerations that we have to make. These are decisions that follow the progression of land. And so what it's being used for today might be different with a future property owner.
Yeah, we took that in consideration as well. The space in itself can be potentially used for someone that has a lot of toys, boat, cars, other things that we think would be valuable for our neighborhood
There's a garage door on it, right?
too.
Yeah. At this point, they're sized down to soften effect, but, you know, later on, if somebody wanted to use something a bit larger, but you'd still have difficulties making big access. It's not like you're gonna pull a semi or a travel bus in there, so.
And one of the things that we thought through was, I mean, my parents are in their early 80s. They still live in Dublin. They'll probably end up taking our garage and redoing that and making that in-law suite, and then we'll need somewhere to park our cars at the end when we get older.
Do you have any more questions for the applicant? Sarah? Robin, you good? Okay. What are you thinking?
For criteria.
Well, hold on a second. The public comment, I think Robin mentioned it. I don't think we need to read them all unless that protocol, read every single one of them.
Typically,
No, that's why I included them in, and just for the applicant's awareness, we included them in your packet materials, so we wouldn't have to go to that degree. But there were approximately 7, and they were all supportive, and their comments were slightly different, but supportive, and primarily the use and the aesthetics of the property.
Thank you.
So I'd like to make a point on criteria number 3. The no substantial adverse effect is the criteria, and it will not cause substantial adverse effect to the property improvements in the vicinity and will not materially impair the intent and purposes of the requirement. The city contends that it's not met because it would have an adverse effect due to we're consistently applying the accessory structures throughout the city, and the request for larger accessory structures would hinder the requirement of this code. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that logic from the city because this is the first case that we've had of this type in 10 years. So it could cascade, but it seems very unlikely that other people will, if this is the very first time this has happened, other people would probably see this and say, oh, well, now we can build giant things in our backyard as well.
Are you saying you think that's going to happen?
I do not think that's going to happen.
I just try to think of how much, this is a massive lot for Dublin. And besides the homes, honestly, in that area along the river, and I mean, there's a couple subdivisions on the other side of the river where we've had massive, they've been attached. I think some new garages have been brought up, but I'm honestly in agreement. I think that the substantial adverse effect has actually been met. I don't think there's going to be a problem if it's built.
I agree.
From my standpoint.
I agree with both of you on that point.
What about on 2?
Well, are you asking me? I'd actually like to talk about 1. I actually think there are special conditions on the property, given kind of the size, shape, the fact that there isn't a basement. That does make it a little bit more unusual in terms of space. So I'm not there on, I don't agree with the city on 1 either.
I do think the shape of the lot and the grading of the lot does mean that it would be very awkward, especially with the current orientation of the house and everything, to build it in the front area. I feel like this is the only area that you could realistically build it, especially with the look of the house. Driving by well before I knew of this, like years ago, I was struck by kind of that glass facade on the north side of the house, and that it looks out over the volleyball court and kind of that front area. I think it would be an eyesore for the rest of the neighborhood to have a large accessory structure in the front of the house. I feel like this realistically is the only place that you could put an accessory structure and not have it be out of place or an eyesore.
I don't think there's any way you can move it in the front.
Yeah, I think that totally affects the character of the neighborhood to move it to the front.
Hey, Tammy, quick question here. So it's my understanding at some point in time, those lots were combined, right? Do you know what each acreage was of the 2 separate lots?
I do not.
Do you know if each of them were over 1 acre?
I mean, yes, I would say both of them would have been slightly over. If in totality they equal 2.7 today, I would say there's probably a little more acreage on the, hold on.
Are you trying to think if each of them had the 1,000 for the acre?
They would each have
250 more.
Right. You would, you look at it just from the standpoint, let's assume that each separate owner wanted to put some kind of structure detached. They'd be able to get, what, 1,250 square feet?
They were both like at 1,350 or whatever.
Right.
1.3 acres for each one, roughly.
And if they built the structure on the boundary between the 2 lines.
Well, no, but that's what I'm trying to get at. I'm just trying to think
By
here.
combining them, they've actually reduced the amount of, by combining them, they've actually reduced the amount of space that they're allowed to have, which, one would think having 2 lots combined into one would be a better scenario than having 2 large buildings on 2 lots beside each other. I guess that's another question, Tammy, and I don't expect you to know this offhand, but it does look, not only the size of it, but are there any other ones that are, looks like there's some that are longer, but that are side-by-side lots that were combined together that you know of in that area?
Yeah, actually, the site directly to the west, that was 2 separate lots, and they combined them, and their acreage is comparable. It's the two sites, the first 2 sites are about an acre, and then you get into the 2.5 acres. And again, honestly, along the river, all of those lots, the largest lot is 2.7, 2.8, but they're all around 2.5, which they look much bigger. So they're equally sized lots in the subdivision.
Was the former property line dividing the 2 plots in east to west line approximately halfway? Not north and south, east to west?
There's an image of it, right?
The first one, I think. Yep.
Yeah.
This is showing the 2. If you look above you, that's the original plat that was recorded.
Because see, in looking at that, that's why I thought when we first saw it too, is I think that the northernmost lot is a unique structure, combining them. I guess the second lot, if you want to call it the southernmost lot that's combined together, I think it's marked as 6 in the layout for the subdivision, to me is not a unique lot, but combining them together does make a unique lot. I mean, we see different size ones, different shape ones, but this one certainly has a different characteristic to me than most of the other ones, or any other one that I can recall seeing.
Well, it's certainly unique to this subdivision if you compare it on this plat.
Our neighbor was just saying his lot is the one below 7, right? Yeah. His was 2 acres, so if you compare 6 to what is that? Below that, it'd be about 2 and 1.7, just for math's sake.
Okay. The idea of an addition for the breezeway, to me, seems somewhat of a silly workaround. That we don't want them to have too large of an accessory structure, so we want them to build more stuff on their land, so that way it is not accessory. And that seems counter to the idea of this regulation, which is to have like smaller, compactor things. It's like, oh, well, we don't want you to have this large thing, but if you added in extra roofing and paving and all of that stuff, then all of a sudden it's part of the house, even if it is still relatively exterior.
Well, yeah, and it's adding more impervious surface too, right? So, I mean, would we really want to encourage that?
I mean,
Not we, meaning the city, like just as a development practice.
the idea with connecting it with a breezeway, although if you just look at it kind of on the outskirts, seems as an extra step, if you will, but the idea is so that the primary structure and the detached structure look comparable in size. That's the primary objective of all of these requirements, is that a detached structure doesn't dominate the site or look disproportionate. So if you're going to connect it with a breezeway, it's going to have some components of proportionality.
But
I get that thought, but I don't think that in at least the elevation drawing that we're seeing, I get if you're talking a huge 2-story barn or something, but this just doesn't seem like that kind of structure that's going to try to dominate the, this reminds me of, and I think it might have been before Robin was on, but the completely different type of request with the garage that we had with the extra large garage door. I believe it was on the other side of the river though.
Yeah, where they needed an extra large for a
For a
transit
handicapped
van.
accessible
Yeah.
van, yeah.
It seems like, given the fact that this is already sunk into the ground, and the council, or the city says there are already a bunch of old trees in the area that block building it elsewhere on the site as well, it seems like if the intent is to make it not seem like this giant hulking structure behind the house, it's not going to even be hardly visible from anywhere that neighbors would see it other than the backyards of the two lots adjacent. It feels like the driveway already kind of curves around, and so you can't just look straight up the driveway and see this large structure. And then from any other angle, the house is going to be blocking it. So it feels like if the intent is to make sure that there's not some giant structure dwarfing the house, that's already not necessarily a consideration that needs to be taken into account.
So here's where I'm at, just to kind of, to move us forward. I think seriously on the second set of four, the city's already told us that they believe that there's two met. I don't have any disagreement with that. I think obviously our focus, and it has been our conversation, are on the non-use of the three first criteria, which all must be met. So my thought on the special condition, clearly there's a special condition in my mind. Yes, there are lots of lots in Dublin along a river, not with this unique shape. There's also lots that have the grading, obviously, towards the river to remove the water. But I think those things combined together make this unique to me. Applicant action, I guess in every request that comes before the board, it has applicant action, or we wouldn't be here at all because they're putting a structure on. So I look at that language to mean, to me, did the applicant create the land? So did you go pile up a bunch of rocks and then say, well, I can't put this here because the rocks are there? Those were things that were already there. You didn't put the river in that I'm aware of. And so I don't believe that the city's version of applicant action doesn't read the same way I interpret that section. And then the no substantial adverse effect, I think that is met as well. We kind of belabored that point in our discussion. So I would actually be in favor of granting this point.
I agree.
My only holdup is the applicant action, that there is the possibility they could build a smaller sized external structure, and they would still be able to get a fair amount of use out of it, even if it's not a full-size regulation volleyball court. And there is an argument to be made that they already have a swimming pool and a volleyball court on their property. So if the worry is that their kids are not going to get enough physical activity because they don't have places to have recreation, they do, and so that it feels not entirely true. So that's the place where I'm hung up.
I think I'm, where I stand on this, and I appreciate that, Robin. In terms of the pool and the other volleyball court, I mean, it's not indoor space, and I love my outdoor space, but I use it maybe a month or two a year in Ohio. Perhaps I'm not as hardy as everyone else, but to me, that's not the same. I also try not to, and I'm hearkening back to the transit van, extra large garage door, the case we had there, and I believe the city had the same comment on action and action. Well, they could park the van somewhere else. They could park it outside. I try not to make judgments on why they're doing something. It's not really my place to say, well, I think you should have a smaller house and a smaller, to me, I try to separate that in the action and action. That doesn't feel like that's an appropriate thing for me to make decisions based on. So,
Well, and don't you think, I think if we're really basing it on the applicant's choosing of a size, in every application that comes before us, that would never be met then, because they could just choose to not build it. And I guess that's, if you look at it that way, I look at it as, is the request for a location or a size based on an action that they have done something of? Did they create a grade on the property that now allows them not to build it? Did they, do something to the property to create this? That's kind of how I interpret that. Doesn't mean that that's how everybody else does, but I just think that in every case that we ever have, it would be, well, you could choose to not build it, you could build it smaller, you could build it in another location. I think that's why we exist.
Well, the reason that most of these come is because they want to be bigger than what's permitted. So that's every single case.
We would have.
Right. That's on a variance respect, whether it's a patio, up 2 feet too big, because they want the 2 feet. Here, it's a little different. I want to go back to one thing real quick, just real quick. It sounds like we have a yes and a yes right here, right, Sarah and Joe? Okay. Robin, you're still thinking about it. So am I. One of the things I want to get back to is code section really says the maximum, right? The maximum that we can have is 2,000 square feet, right? Even if on 5 acres. Is that fair, Tammy? Am I reading that accurately?
Up to a maximum of 2,000.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no. Tammy, you hear me?
I hear you, yes. Yes, I wanted to have an opportunity to read that because there is 2 sections.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
There's
I'm
2
thinking,
points
look at
to
the
that
right section here.
And it's honestly not written terribly well, but the 2,000 would,
Is maximum square footage and number of detached structures. If it's 1 to 5 acres, the maximum is 2,000 square feet. In no case will the height be greater than 22 feet. What's the height on this one? Do we know?
We're talking the median point of the structure, the E was 16 feet.
It would be anything. This says.
Well, he's not asking for a variance, so it must be within the.
I assume it's the peak of the top of the truss.
That'd be greater than what's listed here. Tammy, that's not an issue though? I just want to confirm. Is that correct? The height is not an issue?
no, that is an issue. And I thought we had spoke to someone about the height because we were hesitant whether that would be an issue.
Yeah, it's a 40-foot wide structure, half of that's 20 feet, and it rises 6 inches for every foot. So there's 10 foot of rise, and 25 and a half, 26 feet is what we would be logging in at. A lot of zoning code guys met them look at the median point of the truss, not the peak, but that may not be how Dublin interprets it, which would mean that we would meet the criteria less than 22 feet.
That is how we would measure the height for a primary structure. I'd want to check that for a detached structure.
How do we check that while we're here?
I think she's checking it. Tammy, while you're checking, I just want to make sure I'm clear here that the variance is also, this is for the space and the height. Is that correct?
This variance is simply for size.
Okay. Size of square footage, so not height?
Square footage, yes.
Okay, so in theory, they may have to come back for another.
The code says for detached accessory structures, the maximum height for accessory shall not exceed that permitted to the principal.
Actually, the chart,
In the chart.
there's a chart for,
Oh, wait, was I down in, wait.
for
It's under
1 to
E.
5, 1 to 5 acres.
2E in the section.
It says in no case thou should.
Oh, that's
the
enough.
height.
That's in the over 5 acres in zoned R. Never mind.
Yeah, so I'm just going to look at definitions real quick. Just give me a moment.
I may weigh in.
Oh, absolutely, please.
So regarding that height,
Hey, Tammy, what's the interpretation, I understand what you're saying with regard to the grade aspect. Is it the actual building structure or is it via the grade that we're looking at the 22 feet?
It's the grade.
Okay,
That issue's resolved.
so then we're square on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So coming back to the.
Yeah, so I want to go back to
2,400
the,
square foot.
yeah, so we have 2,400 square foot is what's proposed, right?
Yes.
So I'm having a problem, just to be honest with you here. If, you know, I can pick up some of the special conditions and the inaction, and I don't even know what the last one is right now off the top of my head, but now we're saying we're going to give you, we're going to give you beyond not only, what's allowable based on your acreage size, it's going to be beyond what's even permitted in the code. So that's where I'm stuck here.
I have a question for Tammy, and Tammy, I apologize that we're drawing from the knowledge base of everything here.
That's okay, I'd love to give
Do
knowledge.
you know what the largest structure, detached structure that's been permitted during your tenure is? It certainly doesn't appear like it would be the biggest one.
I mean, honestly, it's very rare that we have detached structures. I remember something slightly over like 1,200 square feet. They're rather small. One, because you usually don't have the acreage to make that work.
Sure.
And two, primarily, that's not a preference for people to have detached structures. So in my 15-year tenure, that's what I would recall. The lots that I would think that would exceed that, I would say exceedingly is probably something that was constructed in the township and then annexed.
And annexed in.
Yep.
What did you say the smallest you could cut it down to and still have a workable court is?
Sorry, if you took the smallest size court, which is a 2-on-2 court, that would be, remember 27 by 52, I think is the numbers, off the top of my head. That's like a outdoor beach court where you play doubles, right? Indoors, the court size is 30 by 60, give or take, so 1,800 square foot with, space to not run into a wall.
Right.
It'd probably be 3 or 4 feet, so you're probably looking around 2,100 would be the minimum, is what I would guess off the top of my head.
So I guess one of the things to think about with that is, so we're basically saying if we take that interpretation, Jason, that we're saying no one is permitted to have a detached volleyball court in the city of Dublin. Not making an opinion one way or another, I'm just saying based on that, that's one of the things
Well, no, what we're saying is that he doesn't have a big enough lot based on the code. If he had over 5 acres, it wouldn't be a problem. So
going back to one of the earlier talking points, the 2.7 acres was originally 2 different lots. If one of the lots was 1.4 acres and one of the lots was 1.3 acres, it's my understanding based on this thing that it's plus 250 feet per square acre or fraction thereof. Does that mean that it would multiply like the 1.4 acres, you would do 0.4 times 250 to get a number? Or would it be they've got a fraction of an acre so they get an extra 250 square feet?
I believe it's the second. And so I looked at that as if they were both 1.3 to 1.4, they would be permitted a total of 20, they would have been 1,250 per lot or 2,500 total. It's part of the thing that I was looking at in the second criteria is had these lots been combined, this building would be permissible under that, but we are not been combined, I'm sorry. So we combined them, then it cannot technically reading of this.
And just to get back to the height determination, the code does define that it's measured from, if it's a flat roof, it's measured from grade to the highest point. If it has a pitched roof, it's the mean height level between the eave and the ridge of the gable, so mid-level.
Which is what you were saying, is the center point of the truss.
and that was under, what was the number?
But it was at 21.
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure, I knew that was for primary structures, I didn't know if that was consistent with detached.
Thank you, Tammy. I mean, the fact that it's the 2 separate lots is the thing that's keeping me in it, or was originally 2 separate lots. Because I think I agree with Jason that it's like, it exceeds the 2,000 square foot minimum. Like, absolutely, it's 2,400 square feet. That's significantly more. But if it were two separate lots and two neighbors decided to each build half of a structure on their house and happen to have them meet in the middle, then it would be permissible. And so to me, it's less of a problem than it would be otherwise. So I think I'm for it, but I would be interested in hearing what Jason has at this point.
Jason, the question I kind of have that just let me know your thought on this is, I do understand the overall square footage, but which, you believe that's under the applicant action or inaction? Because I think that's the one that comes to all of the ones we have. I see the concern with that. I just don't know which criteria you believe isn't met because of that.
Jason, if you don't mind, can I just weigh in on this? For just
Absolutely, please do.
I just want to make one, not to be argumentative about the point. I just want to make sure that when we say action and inaction of the applicant, that refers to the special condition. So in other words, if you determine that there's a grade change in the property and the applicants are applying for a building that's in a location that would normally not be permitted, but it's because there's a grade change, of course, the applicants have done nothing to create that grade change. It's without their doing. There's a correlation between those two criterias. So I
So
just
if our
want to,
special condition is the curvature and the, I guess, the border design of the land, then we would have to say the applicant either didn't cause that, right? So I don't think any of us would be saying that the applicant drew the lot lines. So I guess that makes it even a stronger argument.
I mean, I would even take that to another level. And again, this is more of a discussion for us to, as a group, have some solidarity on, I guess. I would say that whatever you're finding as the special criteria, that it relates to the proposal. So in other words, trying to think of a scenario, if it's an irregularly shaped lot and they decide to push it closer to the house, I'm saying it as a detached structure, they decided to push it closer to the house so it's not at a pinnacle in the back of their property, there's a correlation between the shape of the property and the proposal. Does that make sense? It's a sequential argument, basically. And not to take away from the shape argument, I could concede to the fact that there is somewhat of a unique shape to it. I just want to correlate it to the proposal.
I mean, yeah, the city says in their planning proposal that the variance is requested due to the action of the applicant pursuing a larger than permitted accessory structure. And so I think if we take that into account, that everybody is trying to get those extra few inches in their backyard, then each one of these we would have to deny based on that logic, every one that came before the board. And since we do occasionally allow them, then I would say that this criteria is met for this case.
All right, well, don't we need 3 out of 4? Are you guys ready to vote?
You know, I'm looking at the kind of the code explanation here of this, you know, the standards by which we have to meet. I mean, I think it, you know, we found a special condition. Obviously, the shape and topography of the property is an example of an allowance of a special condition. So I think we're fair on that. I've already mentioned section 3. And honestly, I think 2 is probably met as well, based on the correlation that Tammy noted. Unfortunately, I don't like the fact that we're going to grant the size of this beyond what's, you know, permitted by the code of, even if somebody had a 4.5 acre lot, which I imagine there's probably not that many that would want to also put a volleyball court on. But that's the part I'm struggling with. But I don't know, Joe, you make a good point. I don't know if that's reason enough. How does that not meet the standard then if I'm thinking that I think it'd be okay for 2,000, but not for, 2,400?
Well, if you're not there, it sounds like three of us are yes, and maybe possibly no, but it sounds like we have enough to vote.
The one thing I want to go back to, real quick, just, you had said that the roof is going to be what is it, a tin roof? Okay, and what's the main house, is it shingled? Tammy, on a attached structure, the roofing would have to be the same, right?
I mean, this is a discretionary regulation, so the primary material of the main structure is what? Shingle?
Of the roof, yeah.
Okay, but of the exterior walls, what is it?
Wood siding.
Wood? And what is the primary structure?
Both are the wood siding, same product.
We would probably work with the applicant during the building permit process to make sure there's some components between the two buildings that mirror each other. It could be even the window features or light fixtures, something to draw the two together. But we could easily do that through, I am slightly concerned about it being a metal roof with the size of it. But I guess I would want to work through those discussions with the applicant.
Is that something for us to put a condition on the approval now, or is that something that the building department will take care of later?
No, we'll work with the building department. The board's slightly limited in their architectural palette.
Okay, so Robin, you're in favor? You two are? Okay, I'm just not going to get there on the 2,000 requirement, but it sounds like there's enough to go forward. So if we're done deliberating, then we can, I will, who wants to gauge the motion here?
I gotta find you have the language.
If I could help. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go ahead.
please.
I'd like to make a motion to approve a variance to allow a 2,400 square foot accessory structure, which exceeds the maximum allowed square footage for detached accessory structures.
A second.
Oh, is that okay?
It is. I would just base it on the discussion that you've had
Oh,
pertaining.
based on the discussion in the meeting today.
Second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Nye,
Yes.
Mr. Clower,
Yes.
Mr. Deschler,
No.
and Ms. Herbert.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thanks for your time. Okay. Our second case this evening, the Hopkins residence at 9376 Nicholson Way. That's case number 21-186AA. As an administrative appeal, for reference, this is an application for an administrative appeal of a determination made by the City of Dublin Planning Division of open and uncovered structures as it relates to a trellis over an existing patio that encroaches 5 feet into a required rear yard setback. The .17 acre site is zoned Plan Unit Development District Tartan Ridge and is located west of Nicholson Way, 250 feet north of the intersection of Infield Court. Staff, will you go forward, please?
Thank you very much. The second case before the Board of Zoning Appeals is an administrative appeal that has progressed through discussions with staff. It deals with a property in Tartan Ridge for the Hopkins residents. Just as a general description of the site, as you mentioned, it's approximately 1/5 of an acre. site located on the east side of Nicholson Way. This is just north of McKittrick, and it's on the southern end of Tartan Ridge. Tartan Ridge is a planned unit development district, and the surrounding districts reflect that zoning district. Again, just to give some context to the site as it exists today, this is the existing single-family residential structure that's been constructed with a single access point from Nicholson Way. The rear yard amenities are the discussion point that we will be considering tonight. To the rear of the existing structure is an at-grade patio with a covered pergola. This is just showing another element to the site, again, showing just the location of the exterior space. Originally, this was proposed to be a variance to the Board of Zoning Appeals based on the fact that the pergola does encroach into the rear yard space, approximately 5 feet. We did have discussions with the applicant, and based on their applicant's statement, we determined that it would be more appropriate to discuss interpretations of a clause that we use quite commonly with planning, and that's what we would refer to as open and uncovered, which is a provision of the code that allows for an exterior space that, again, meets those two criteria to encroach into a rear yard setback 5 feet. For planning analysis, we did want to look at the site in totality. Again, the sequence of events, the applicant did construct an at-grade patio, and to be very clear, the at-grade patio is permissive to encroach into the rear yard setback as open and uncovered. The provisions we've determined did not apply to, in this case, a pergola, which we believe is partially covered and does not reflect that provision of the code. Just for educational purposes for the board, since we do not have administrative appeals commonly, we wanted to discuss the code section that gives the Board of Zoning Appeals authority for appeals. It simply states that appeals may be taken by any person or any government department affected or aggrieved and reviewed by any order, requirement, decision, or determination where it's alleged by the applicant that there is an error or misinterpretation in any order. And the reason why I put that is assessing that either we're using our authority outside the boundaries that you believe it to be, or that we're simply misinterpreting the purpose and intent of a section. In that, the board has the capabilities to determine whether or not the decision was made in error and provide proper direction for the applicants. In conclusion, you can reverse, affirm, wholly or partly, or modify the order, requirement, or decision made by the City of Dublin. So to be very specific to the applicant's request, again, reviewing their applicant statement, they mentioned that they believed that the existing pergola does meet the definition of open and uncovered, and that is the code section that we're focusing on tonight. If that were to be the case, the pergola would then be capable of extending into the setback 5 feet. The applicant's statement focuses again on definitions. In our analysis, we've provided their definitions. We will concede that the definitions in our code section do not define open and uncovered, and we focused our discussion on how this code section has been applied to properties in the past, as well as some analysis of the definitions that they provided. In the applicant's statement, again, they're saying the conclusion is that the pergola is open on all sides and does not have a roof. Therefore, it's similar to a fence or a wall. That's their first analysis. The second, again, referencing a common reference for definitions, which is the Webster Dictionary for open and covered are the two specific definitions that they provided. Again, just highlighting the applicant statements, their conclusion for opened are the 5 points that you read before you, that it's not enclosed or have any type of confining barrier, that it's completely free from concealment, exposed to general view or knowledge. Third, that it's not covered with a top, roof, or a lid. Fourth is having no protective covering. And fifth, presenting no obstacles to passage of view. Those are slightly abbreviated. In terms of covered, I did look in the Webster Dictionary. There was nothing to address uncovered, so I then deducted that the applicants addressed covered, and I'll allow the applicant and or their agent to confirm that. But in terms of the materials that were submitted, covered means protection, shelter, or concealment. So if you reverse that logic, it would be unprotected and unconcealed, basically. Lastly, the provision that we're speaking of, open and uncovered, and the code specifically applies to porches. So the applicant has provided a definition for a porch to then make the direct correlation to this provision of the code. And their definition that they provided is a covered area adjoining an entrance to the building and usually having a separate roof. Sorry. For planning analysis, so we always take the applicant statement, we analyze it, and then we provide our own separate analysis. And we've done so in this particular scenario. We've provided a 3-part analysis. The first is simply that we believe a pergola is not completely open nor completely uncovered, that it's partially both of those two scenarios. The second is that a pergola, in our determination, doesn't meet the criteria that was stated in the Webster's Dictionary. I'm sorry. And then to further that point, we've highlighted the areas that we don't believe that it meets. The first, under open, it's accessible on all or nearly all sides. We believe a pergola is not accessible in this particular instance. If it's connected to the primary structure, it's not accessible from 3 of the 4 openings. Completely free from concealment or exposed to general view. You cannot completely see through a pergola. You can see partially through, but that's not completely an option, that it's not covered. Again, it does have partial covering with a structural system that secures the pergola, that it doesn't have a protective covering. In this particular instance, and I'll show the board a visual representation of what's been provided, but there is actually an awning that's attached to the pergola, and it does provide a covering. We've tried to keep this analysis to the pergola itself because that is what we were speaking of, and even a pergola without an awning does have some minimal protection just based on the nature of the structure. And again, just the passage, the view shed through a pergola is not completely unobstructed, I guess is the right word. So again, we have a 3-part analysis that we believe the applicant's definitions were not completely in line with their determination. We would suggest to the board, if the pergola is a porch, which is again how they got to this section of the code, and their provision or their definition of porch, it basically says that that it has a roof. So if it has a roof, then it's not therefore uncovered. So it's kind of a circular argument. That's more of a tangent, but it is a technicality that gets us to this code provision. So for the board's edification, an administrative appeal from the board allows you to determine whether or not a decision was made properly, and in doing so with the standards of the code. We believe that the code does clearly define what open and uncovered signifies, and we do attest that it's been applied equally through the duration of at least my tenure with the department. Having stated that, we are asking the Board of Zoning Appeals to affirm our determination that a pergola is not considered an open and uncovered porch, and therefore would then allow them to encroach into the 5 feet that's being requested. And with that, I can offer a couple of points. Of course, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. We do have a significant amount of public comments that's been provided, again, well before the meeting. That includes video, pictures, and basically rebuttals and neighbor testimonies, so it's quite lengthy in nature. I know the applicant and their representative is here to address the board. And again, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
So the code does not define porch, right? We don't have that definition in a code.
Correct.
We don't have a definition in the code of awning or patio, do we?
We do not.
Okay. Is the awning okay on its own?
Actually, we've relayed this question to our legal staff, and the reason why we're asking the question is there's retractable awnings that if you, and again, there's a lot of construction differences in the scenario, but if there are no posts that are physically in the ground, does that then mean it's not applicable to the setback? And honestly, I don't have an answer to that question, and that is something that we've asked ourselves.
Is the awning here attached? How's it attached to the house? I mean, it's not part of this code. It's not part of this variance, but you mentioned it. So is it attached to the house? Is it retractable? Do we know like how that works?
I'd have to defer to the applicant.
Can I clarify the timeline a little bit? So they bought this house, they potentially built a deck that was open and uncovered, or an exterior flat area with the walls that was open and uncovered. Then they added a pergola, at which point the city says that wasn't permitted, you overstepped, and now they're coming before us. That's the general timeline, is that correct?
That's true, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Tammy, do you know when the decision by the city was made with regard to the it being open, in violation of the open uncovered provision?
To be specific, if you're asking when we were notified that this construction occurred, it was in July of this past year, or this year, excuse me.
Right, when did the city go out then and make the determination?
So code enforcement would have went to the site in July to verify that the pergola was constructed. Discussions of whether it met open and uncovered came much later. That's when the planning staff got involved and we evaluated the case. But the actions that occurred in July would have simply been that the pergola was constructed and there wasn't a permit.
Okay.
An
Right.
approved permit, I should be corrected.
So when did staff get involved and notify the applicant that it was in violation via the open and uncovered provision that we're here for?
Yeah, so this would have progressed through code enforcement up until October, in the latter part of October, to be exact. They then connected with our planning staff to then apply for an application, and that would have been, and this is approximate dates, but I would say November. They did apply originally for a variance for all of the same reasons that many of the variances come before you. We reviewed their application as such. When we reviewed their statement, and we being staff, we analyzed that their discussion seemed more appropriate to an appeal than a variance. And we made that determination when we presented our findings with a staff report to the board when it was originally proposed to be presented. That might have been a longer answer than you wanted.
Right, I guess I'm just looking from a timing perspective, when was the applicant notified that the pergola that was built essentially was in violation of the code?
Well, in violation of the code originally would have been in July in the sense that it didn't have a permit. In violation of open and uncovered, that would have been when we issued the planning report in November. That was the basis for one of our bases of our planning report to the Board of Zoning Appeals. Am I answering your question? I feel like I'm not answering.
Well, I mean, I think it's important for this since this doesn't come before us. So we need to make sure that procedurally we're dealing with it appropriately. In looking at section F of 153.231 with respect to the administrative appeal, once a decision has been made about, I don't want to call it an appealable decision, but that's what it is. Once the decision has been made, essentially finding a violation or rejecting in this open and uncovered aspect, the appeal must be filed within 20 days. I need to know the timeline. So
Yep.
I'm confident that this is actually an appealable order that we're here for today.
Yep, easy. So our report was issued to the applicant's agent on November 15th. That's when they would have been notified that in our determination, the city of Dublin, it is not open and uncovered. So they have 20 days beyond that date to file the appeal.
So when was it filed?
December 6th. The 20th would have been somewhere within the Saturday or Sunday of the weekend. And so we consulted with our law director to ensure that the Monday that preceded that 20th day is acceptable as a determination that it meets that criteria.
So the 20th day was a Sunday, and did you guys give it to them when you said the determination was issued on November 15th? How was that kind of communicated to them? Was it by mail?
Actually, email.
Email? To their attorney or to them?
To the attorney. As soon as there's an agent involved, that they're the direct point of contact.
I mean, I think it's reasonable when something falls on a non-business day to go to the next day, typically when it falls on a Sunday.
I mean, if we look at the civil rules, it tells us that. So you're saying if we're looking at this the same way, if that's what you're saying. The problem I have is it doesn't, we don't have that same language in here that I'm seeing that says if it falls on a weekend, it goes to the next day. So I feel like we maybe don't have the information we need to make that determination.
Tammy, what was the date again that you sent the email?
November 15th.
And what was actually filed on what day was it, the 6th?
It would have been an administrative appeal. It's an application similar to a non-use variance.
Sure.
I believe it's the letter also from Mr. McCash that's dated that day.
On the 6th?
Yeah.
Tammy, you have a copy of the email that you sent them?
No, but I have a copy of our law director's determination with the dates included.
And that
know-
determination was what? Do you want to read that into the record?
The determination that we gave them on the 6th would have been the planning report, and in that analysis, we stated that we do not believe it to be open and uncovered as part of our analysis, as part of a key part of our analysis.
You said on the 6th, you mean on the 15th? You notified them that?
Yes.
Okay. You said the 6th. I just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, that's why I was confused when you,
So my notification would have been November 15th. They filed on December 6th. So that's where we're getting the 20 days from. So from November 15th, they would have 20 days to file an appeal. That would have been the Sunday before they filed. They filed on the next business day, which was Monday.
I calculate as well.
It was
Always
the-
calculate you don't count the day of, and it would land on the Sunday, December 5th. And so the next business day would have been December 6th.
Was the application filled out online?
It's an electronic submission.
Is the website closed down on Sunday?
I don't know if you can submit information. We would not have received information simply based
fair.
on it not being a business day.
Is there anything preventing anybody from submitting anything on the weekend, on any weekend?
Anyone can submit something, but it's not considered an application until we review it.
You would have had a timestamp of when it was received as submitted, though, wouldn't you?
It's all an electronic submission, so we would have dates associated with all of that.
When code enforcement went out there originally in July, what were, if you know, and if you don't, I can bring the applicant up to ask those questions before we get into their presentation, because I do want to address this procedural issue, and to the extent we can go forward, we'll go forward with the merits. What was code enforcement telling them? That it was in violation of what at that point in time?
That they did not have a building permit to construct a pergola. So they simply would have viewed the site, confirmed that there is in fact a pergola that's been constructed, and they would have verified that there's not an approved permit. They did apply for a permit, it wasn't approved.
Okay, so at that point in time, there was a decision made in July that there was a violation. And that in and of itself, with regard to the build of the pergola, that was not appealed. That permit was not appealed. That was rejected.
Well, there's nothing to appeal because they're simply saying the pergola exists and they don't have a permit. So then our code enforcement would have reached out to them, set of permits required. We worked through a duration of conversations. I know that code enforcement gave them a deadline to do something, whether it's remove the pergola, apply for a permit, or apply for a variance. And that was in the latter part of October. So there was dialogue going on between the parties during that time frame. And the applicants responded within three business days of that deadline and filed the variance. Again, that was the direction that the applicants were taking originally before we, staff, concluded that the appeal was the more appropriate of the two options.
Jason, I just don't think the July date, to me, has any relation to the 20-day calculation. They didn't have the determination that they're appealing at that point. Again,
I thought Timmy said that they put in a permit, though. Did they request a permit that was denied?
Maybe I'm misunderstanding. In July, all our code enforcement officers did was identify and ensure there was a pergola.
Right, I mean, let's be honest. It was fair to assume that somebody complained that it was up, right? That's how code enforcement generally comes out. Is that fair?
Generally, yes.
Okay, so they come out, they tell the homeowner, you built this pergola without a permit.
Right.
Walk me through what happened, because I'm still confused. 4 months went by, and then that's the timeline it is to fix it? It's not what, I know that's not what code enforcement, I know code enforcement's a lot faster than that.
We would, if the applicant's working with us to secure an end result, they will give them a substantial amount of time. So I'm not saying that that was the totality of the 4 months. I'm saying that we thought we were reaching a conclusion, and that end of that conclusion was the latter part of October. And again, the applicants within days filed the variance. So when we said you have a deadline to correct this problem in October, they filed a variance within several days of that deadline.
Okay, so just to be clear, there was no special permit request made post the code enforcement coming out and identifying that the pergola was constructed in violation of the code. Is that right? There was no other permit requested?
I'm not following your question. Are you saying did they apply for the permit after code enforcement notified them?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And that was via the variance request?
No, they actually applied for a building permit. So
Okay.
a building permit is an administrative review. So you walk in, you apply for it.
Right?
The building department will review it, and if it doesn't meet code requirements, they will then deny it.
Okay, so that happened, right? When did the building department reject the pergola?
It would have been between July and October, because code enforcement would have only gotten involved once the applicants are notified that there is in fact a violation and it doesn't meet code.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because we're new to this portion of it. So between the July and October, when they bring the application in, they tell them this does not meet the criteria. Is there a formal document handed to them? Do they stamp it rejected? I mean, what's the process? Do they walk away knowing it's been rejected?
There's a comment letter that will be sent to them, because this zoning could be only of one of a few things that could be wrong. So they send them a comment letter. I'm going to call it a comment letter. It's basically a list of things that you have to do, and notify them this is what you have to do to get an approved permit.
It's basically a rejection letter, and it says it's
Yes.
rejected. If you want us to turn it around and approve it, you have to do these things.
Yes.
Do you have that letter? The rejection letter that was given in, sounds like October?
I do not know.
Okay.
That's a slightly different division, but again, we're all coordinating, and I want to be perfectly clear, the whole intent of all of this is that we know that we're moving forward in a positive direction to correct the problem. Code enforcement does have discretion. It's not, you have 15 days and we will do X. They do have the discretion to say, we know you're working towards a solution and we give you 30 more days.
I think their goal is to try to work with the residents and not go force them to tear it down the next day if you think there's going to be a resolution.
That's exactly right.
And just to double check, they never submitted a permit prior to code enforcement coming out, correct?
Yes, that is true, unless the applicant wants to refute that, but I have no documentation that would suggest that.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, listen, it sounds like there was a lot of discussion that's gone on for a couple of months, and at some point, and that point sounds like it was November 15th, they got a letter, they decided to appeal, that the code doesn't have the wonderful civil rule language, but, you know, I think we have as the lawyer, Zach, or what's his name? Thad, sorry, stated, you know, it would be our determination whether we have jurisdiction. I think that it's reasonable if the date falls on a Sunday that you file on Monday, and that's within the 20 days. And I would hold that I would be of the opinion we have jurisdiction to hear this.
I think we're looking at the wrong thing. It's the rejection of the permit for the pergola. Sarah, this is similar to the one we had with the driveway, where the neighbor complained after it was built.
The decision that they're appealing, though, is the open and uncovered, and that's 15th.
It relates to the pergola. That's the issue. It relates to, it's the same thing.
It took them several months to get to that. They didn't know that in the summer. Is that fair?
I don't know what to tell you.
Is that fair? She agrees.
They have a city order. If you look at the way the statute's constructed, it's a decision by the government. So the building department made a determination. If they wanted to appeal it at that point in time, they had 20 days from the date whenever that letter was, which I don't know. But it was some point in time between July and October.
That appeal would be of just not having a building permit, not the open and uncovered, and we can encroach into the backyard.
It's the same thing.
I disagree. So I say we have jurisdiction and move on to here. I mean, what do you guys think? I'm not the only one here.
Honestly, unfortunately, without the city attorney here, you know, to help clarify a little more, my inclination is that if we're going to proceed, I'm going to reject it based on it's not within the day period of the decision. That's out on that issue.
But the purpose of all of this is to work with the citizens of Dublin to come to a good resolution before it gets out of hand and we're just sending people into their backyards to destroy something that's out of code.
I'm not saying it has to be destroyed. What I'm saying is they can apply for some, they could, and I don't know what the city's conversations were. There's other ways to get, post-building approval. That's not what is before us today, though. That's the difference. This is not a post-variance request where somebody did something and they're asking for permission that they should have asked for before. This is an appeal of a decision by the city about the structure. That's the difference.
About the interpretation of open and uncovered. That's what it's an appeal of.
Tammy, what is,
And according to the lawyer, which we should probably read into the record because I'm not sure the applicant has the benefit of it, it's our determination to figure out whether we have jurisdiction. So, I mean, I say we do that and then move on.
That might be part of my suggestion is it is the board's determination of whether that you believe that it meets the 20-day appealable timeframe. So what you could possibly do is actually just call a motion and vote, and a majority would concur.
Here's the problem I have. I fall right in between you two. I disagree with Jason about which is being appealed. I agree with Sarah on that. I do not agree on the 20 days. We do not get to make language of this code that says that it falls on a Sunday. If we're presented with language that says the calculation doesn't include weekends, then I'm for going for everything. I'm not going to make that interpretation. It says 20 days. We do not have the luxury of having language that says if it falls on a weekend, it doesn't. But we can also have Mr. McCash tell us he may have submitted it on Sunday. We can find that out. We don't know the answer yet. So if it was submitted on Sunday and we can prove that, I think we can go forward. I don't agree that the first notification, July, October, those are irrelevant to me. It was an ongoing conversation. I agree with Sarah that it was not until they had the decision of the determination of the open and uncovered, which is what they're appealing, they had to have, I'm going to use a legal term, but a final appealable order. They had to have something saying this is what we're determining for them to appeal. And so until they had that document telling them that was what was being, the decision was being made, they wouldn't have known to appeal it. So I agree with you on that. I don't think that date's there. I think that this code should read that it doesn't fall on weekends, but it doesn't. And so I'm not willing to extend what I think it should say or what I want it to say that's what it does say.
we don't know what
What has the city done in the
rejection-
past?
I was going to hold on. I agree with that, but what did the permit rejection say? Do we have that? Do we have a copy of it?
The determination is a staff report that says we do not believe it to be open and uncovered. That was a primary part of our analysis.
I understand that part from November. I'm talking about when they applied,
I think
whenever that was.
I think you mean the thing that happened in October. They gave them a determination that said, here are the reasons it's not approved. Are you saying when was that letter and what did it say?
Well, I mean, they applied to have the pergola approved, and that was rejected, right, Tammy? They requested a permit for it.
They did, yes.
Okay, what did the response from the city say to them?
It's a comment letter that would have had whatever is wrong that they needs to be corrected. It's more of a.
I need to see
But
that.
I think what Jason's saying is, did one of those things say it's covered? Because if that's the case, you're saying that's where the time started.
No, it would not. It would simply say that it doesn't meet a setback. It's a very generic response.
But I don't have it.
But
I mean, I know I haven't seen one of the letters. I don't know what it says. It's seemingly that's important for this because it describes the entirety of the situation. Feels like we're cutting that part out. I honestly don't think that's appropriate, just from a historical standpoint. But what we can do is this. Let's answer that one question, though, that you had. What has the city done on days when things had to be done on filing times? With regard to this specific statute first, and then we can expand on if we don't have any historical nature on this specific statute, this ordinance, then we can go to something else.
to answer the question, what has the board done in the past? The board has actually waived the 20-day process. We've had appeals, and I cannot give you a determination whether it was 40 days or 60 days, but we have extended that time frame. Again, with the idea that we're giving the applicants the benefit of a conversation. That is to this board's discretion. And then Mr. Deschler, I would say if any of the documentation leading up to the staff report helps with this discussion, we can provide it. We were simply providing information based on the fact that that final determination was November 15th.
I can tell you one of the things that would help me, which is not something you're going to be able to do while you're here, is if there's been a determination on an exact issue that's before us that's already happened, I need to see what that was, when it was, and why it was. And so if this board has said 60 days is okay, when was that? Which code were they interpreting? And when? I feel like, again, we're hearing an appeal. If this has already been determined by our predecessors in this exact board, I would need to see what that is, because I do think that precedent's important.
And I think that would bolster I think we should just go ahead and use our discretion here, even for one day, 24 hours, and hear the citizens' appeal.
So if we say this is out of line and that they did not meet the 20-day requirement, what is the end result? Does the city say, okay, you missed the requirement and so now you have to tear it down? Or
They can apply for a variance.
So, well, they actually do have a variance that's already in file. They've not closed that case, so they could therefore come back before the board under that case provision. So that would be either that or correct the pergola to meet the setback.
So we're not here all night. I'm going to go ahead and summarize where I'm at so everybody knows. I think the November 15th, from what I have before me, Jason, I agree with you. There may be something else I don't have. I believe is the date. If Tammy, who I believe is telling us this under oath, this board has done this before and gone beyond the 20 days, I feel like that, as Sarah said, 21 days, 20.5 days. I don't know how if the board's gone to greater than that before, we can say this doesn't fit that. So I say my position would be based on that information from Tammy, I would move to go forward that we do have the jurisdiction, for lack of a better term, to hear this.
I agree.
So maybe a motion is appropriate. I make a motion that the board has jurisdiction to hear this administrative appeal.
I second.
Roll, please.
Mr. Deschler,
I'm going to vote against it. I'm going to say no, and the reason being is I don't think we have enough information to be to accurately and appropriately determine whether or not there's jurisdiction. So if we're making the decision now, the answer is no.
May I ask a question in the middle of our vote? Is that possible? What's the option to get that information?
I have no idea. I want to know the precedent that you said, and I want to know every single document that was from the city to them between that time period. Because we, honestly, based on this is the crazy part. If we're going to get into this, I'll tell you this, hold the motion, you can hold the vote for a second. No matter what, we can't even take their testimony. If you look at the code, we only can go on what the staff had at the time to make the decision. No additional testimony is permitted under the code. So it honestly doesn't even matter. The way I'm reading this from this section, it's only based on what the city had at the time. So arguments by the applicant and testimony by the applicant from when the decision was made till now wouldn't be appropriate. Am I reading that correctly, Tammy? In section 4, the board is limited to the information that was available to the administrative official or body who made the decision being appealed. Additional testimony is not appropriate.
Then how would we get a letter from the attorney giving us their interpretation? You just gave us their interpretation of all the definitions. That's not anything we can consider. Am I correct?
Well, that's not testimony.
No, to that point, that was part of their application, just so we get that out of the way. That was, when they submitted the application on the 6th, that was their application.
The attorney letter came with the app.
Mm-hmm.
But that wouldn't be, that doesn't matter, because it's before the decision. So it's before the 15th. That's the information that we're allowed to.
Well, that's what I just asked. Tammy told me I was wrong. So
they did
consider that.
I'm just reading the code.
Can I ask a question? I know this is very strange how we're doing this. Did you have the letter from the attorney giving you what they believe the definitions were before the determination was made on November 15th.
Yes.
That's what I thought you were saying.
Even as part of the variance application, that's what led us to this process, is when we read the applicant's statement as part of the variance application, they weren't saying they have special conditions of the site. They were saying, we just don't agree with you making this determination. So to give them a fair format for this discussion, that's when we discussed an administrative appeal. And then, Mr. Deschler, it does say that the board's not to reconsider any additional information. The board has discretion to waive that requirement. You typically, honestly, there's been cases for and against, depending on what the level of information is. If it's a point of clarification, the board has typically accepted it just to highlight your decision-making processes. If it's material that needs to be digested and analyzed, then that's, I think, the area that you've rejected additional information.
And I will just say there's only been one other time that I've been sitting on this board, and this is my last probably meeting, maybe the next one is. And we've actually done this administrative appeal, and we did have the same, we had a lawyer involved, and the statement was submitted, and really, he did stand up there, and it was part of discussion, but it wasn't any new facts. It was really just a discussion as the way we handled it. It was that post road, that medical center on Perimeter Post, I can't remember, but that's what it was, and it was a code provision interpretation just like we have here. So we did allow their attorney to speak, and it really facilitated discussion. It was many years ago, though.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that information can't, honestly, the applicant's, based on the reading of the code, what's in the applicant's statement doesn't even get to come in, because it would be whatever was before the decision. And my understanding is there was some information that was exchanged or provided by the applicant to the city before the determination. Again, I don't know what that was or whether we have that. But let's go back to this procedural issue. It sounds like there's still a position to go forward on it, and that's fine. We can recall we've already had the motion in the second. I can recall the roll. I'll state my position again, and then you guys can give your affirmative, and we can go forward with it if you want. Honestly, what I've been hearing a lot is that the board has deference on a lot of these dates and rules. I'm not certain. Personally, I don't agree with it, and that's something that we can discuss offline. But that's fine. Are we fair? Are we going to be able to go forward, or do we think we're going to stop?
We had a motion and a second, and she was reading the roll.
Okay. Do we want to go forward with that then?
Yes.
That's fine. Okay. Can you recall me? I'll give my position again, and then you can go to everybody else.
Okay, you were first, and it's Jason Deschler again.
Yes, I'm going to say no for the reasons that obviously I've stated here, and I'll try not to be too duplicative. I don't feel we have enough information based on the history of allowance of the 20-day appeal, as well as I feel there's information related to the rejection of the permit that may be pertinent to this issue.
Mr. Clower?
I say yes, based on the word of the lawyer who said the board has discretion as to what that 20-day allowance is.
Mr. Nye?
Yes, based on the clarification from our counsel and the testimony under oath from Tammy Noble about the board's prior handling of this matter, this type of matter.
Ms. Herbert?
Yes.
Do we have any questions for Tammy related to the staff's presentation, city's presentation?
Do we need to go back to the public testimony thing for if it was after the 15th of November, we're not allowed to accept it?
I think that's within our discretion, but we're not there yet. Because
Okay.
we'll get to that point. A good point though, Robin. Thank you. Do we have any questions for Tammy on her presentation as of now?
I do not.
Sarah, anything?
I may have some, but not now.
Okay.
I do not.
Okay. Counselor, real quick though, I don't think you stood and gave the oath for testimony.
Correct, because I'm not testifying. I'm representing an applicant before the board here. And as you pointed out in the administrative appeal, additional testimony isn't permitted.
Right, but if you're going to be providing information to the board related to your applicant on her behalf, are you saying then you're going to be dishonest to us? I'd appreciate it if you want to move forward.
He's saying he doesn't have to because he's not testifying. If you
Typically,
want him to
attorneys-
give the oath, I'm sure he
Then
will.
what information is he going to be providing? If he's going to be talking about dates or rehashing things, then he has personal knowledge. We'll see how it goes. All right, that's fair.
Well, the question has typically been, and this has been addressed by legal staff here in the city of Dublin before, is attorneys are not testifying, they're actually presenting. But if you want to swear me in, that's fine. At this particular point, an administrative appeal is based upon staff's determination, as you clearly indicated, at the time of making that decision. So there's no new evidence or testimony per se. There would be perhaps cross-examination of staff as far as what it was that they used to make their determination, but that's not testimony.
That's fine. Well, you can go ahead and proceed. Okay.
And just for help clarify some of the issues on the 20-day time period, and I gave Tammy a copy of the July 20th, or July 12th, I believe is what it is, letter from the original application, is they didn't make a determination that it was open, covered, uncovered, anything like that. They just cited the setbacks requirement. So they didn't make a determination on that. That determination came on November 15th. I received it by email. So 20 days from that is on a Saturday, December 4th. So legal staff, Mr. Boggs, I believe, at least in the email that I saw, he determined that we were within the filing period when we filed on December 6th. So, and if you're correct, there is no language in the code dealing with how you compute time for those filing provisions. If you look at Civil Rule 6, then you don't count the 15th, which means our 20 days would have been not on December 4th, it would have been on December 5th, which is still a Saturday. Civil Rule 6 also says if it falls on then, that it goes to the next business day, which would be December 6th, the day we filed. So that's, at least as far as a time standpoint, we believe that we're within the 20-day time period. As far as the staff's determination, Tammy, you had indicated one thing. You had up on the board, you had a slide that showed 19 feet from the pergola to the rear yard.
And just for clarification, this would have been submitted with the variance application, so that could be to the grade of the patio.
That would have been what?
It could be the grade of the patio. That was just the point being in this graphic that it does not meet the 25-foot setback is the point.
Correct, but your slide that you presented, there's a 25-foot setback in the rear yard. The pergola encroaches 5 feet into the setback. You've indicated on that slide before the board that the pergola to the rear property line is 19 feet. If I take 25 and I subtract 5, that's actually 20 feet, not 19 feet. So just clarification that it's 20 feet from the rear property line, not 19.
So the scale drawings that we received shows 2 from the building line to the rear property is 31 feet. If you encroach 5 feet into that, or 5 to 6 feet, that's where we got the 19 feet.
It's 31 feet from the rear
setback.
property line to the rear of the building.
We have it shown from the rear of the property to the setback.
That one on the screen.
It looks like the rear of the building to the property line on the drawing in the packet.
So if you look just north of the green box is representative of the pergola and the at-grade patio. If you look just above that, 31 feet is the measurement, again, from the building line to the rear yard setback. If you deduct 5 feet, that's where we've gotten the 19 feet. The purpose of this slide is to show that it encroaches in a setback. I don't want to get overly caught up, because, primarily based on the fact that that's not what we're discussing tonight, but the point being that it does encroach into the setback.
I thought our determination was on the determination of open and.
Yeah, because
uncovered.
if it is open and uncovered, it can encroach. That's the issue.
That's correct.
So,
I think we need to make that determination
yes.
first. That's
Yeah,
right.
then we don't need to worry about the encroachment.
So under the section that you've cited, that you've determined that this pergola is not open and uncovered, fences are permitted in that section, correct?
There's different provisions for fences, but they do have to meet setback requirements.
What are the setback requirements?
Hey, hold on a second. The purpose is to present to the board. It's not to arguably cross-examine staff. So if you want to make the presentation on behalf of your applicant to us about the open and uncovered, and then we're the ones that kind of can correlate, if there's questions.
Well, am I presenting to the board or am I?
You're presenting to us.
Okay, and staff has made a determination that a particular code section applies in this case, and it's staff's interpretation of this section.
Correct.
So I'm not allowed to ask
Tammy,
staff
on this
about
issue, hold on one second. You're fair point. Situations though for this, you can be subject to questioning. Are you the final determination on this? Would you be the individual, or is there anybody else in the city? Because this has come up before where the individual wasn't brought forth that made the determination. Are you the one that made this determination?
If the question is, does a fence need to meet?
No, I'm talking about for this decision, for the decision related to the open and uncover, the one that's being appealed. Are you the individual that would be testifying on behalf of the city? Or is there somebody else that needed to be here?
Sorry, it would be the planning staff, yes.
Okay, so are you then, on behalf of the planning staff, going to be answering the questions? Okay. I just wanted to make sure we're okay.
All right.
So you can go ahead, proceed.
So what is the requirements as far as the fence in this particular situation? How far would a fence be permitted to encroach?
The fence is required the same setback as a buildable, it's defined as a buildable area, so a fence would be the same applicable area as a structure. And there are caveats to that, I will say. If a property is over a certain size, there are different parameters. If it's over 30,000 square feet in size, the property itself, you can do perimeter fencing. Or the other caveat, there's a lot of nuances to this, so I don't want to overcomplicate it, but a lot of planned unit developments have different specifications than simply deferring to code.
But would you agree under section 153.071B1A, it says fences, walls, and landscaping shall be permitted in any required yard? And there's no provision that says up to 5 feet?
There's definitions for fences. There's open fences and there's solid fences. That code section, if you proceed further, identifies open fences. So in terms of a more decorative or less confining type of fence. So again, there's lots of specificity to that question.
So what you're saying is under 153.071B1A, that there's a limitation on the type of fence? And the
Yes.
size of the fence?
Yes.
And what is that?
Whether it's open or whether it's a solid fence. If it's an open fence, and there are definitions to that, if it's an open fence, it could be beyond that setback. If it's a solid fence, it would need to meet that setback.
And what constitutes an open fence?
There's a definition in the code.
And do you know what that is by chance?
So under section 153.080, specifically C, the definition of open fence, a fence constructed for its functionality, ornamental, or decorative effect, and when view at right angles having not less than 50% of its vertical surface area open to light and air. Permitted open ornamental fences, and then it goes on.
So the zoning code doesn't have a definition of open, correct?
I'm sorry, it doesn't have a definition of an open fence?
No, the zoning code doesn't have a definition of the term open.
True. True.
What about partially open fence? Can partially open fence be within this required rear yard setback?
Partially open or open accent fences shall be located within the buildable area. It's further in the, that's further towards 153.080B1. Are we addressing a trellis or a pergola?
Pergola is a fancy name for a trellis.
We do differentiate them, but they're structures. An arbor, a fence of lattice work used as a screening or support for climbing plants. That's specifically trellis.
You have a definition for pergola in the zoning code.
I'm looking at it. Oh, that we do. It's not in this particular section of the code.
Okay. Do you need her to answer that before you move on?
Were you looking up a definition of arbor or pergola?
I did read the definition of arbor and trellis, but there's, in a different section, there's a definition for pergola. I'm just trying to find it. I don't know if there's additional questions while I look for this, so we don't.
Hey, Tammy, real quick, not that it matters, and not that I was doing it accurately, mind you, but I was able to search the ordinances and found a pergola mentioned in 153.039. I'm not certain that meets what you were looking for.
The Innovation District.
What is it? 153 point what?
039.
Innovation District requirements.
The word pergola is not within the definition sections of the zoning code, correct? You're looking for it somewhere else.
No, we're currently talking about the zoning code. I'm at 153.039.
I don't see a definition there. I just see it mentioned. I couldn't, for what it's worth, find a definition of pergola.
That's what Jason said, the only time it's mentioned at all.
That, yeah, yeah. Agree.
That's true, and that was part of our staff report. For purpose, is that the question?
Just in general, are they different elements or are they the same element?
They both have to meet the setbacks.
But I guess the question is it a porch, a patio? Is a patio a porch, or are they two different distinct elements?
Hard surfaced or paved area.
I would concur with that, but I want to look up the definition of structure. Under that definition? Mhm. I would concur it doesn't fall under that definition. That it doesn't fall under that definition.
Also concur that 15307 would be 1C only discusses porches. It does not discuss patios, decks, driveways, or any other hard surface area.
It does only mention porches, yes.
You've already indicated that arbors and trellises are defined in the zoning code, correct?
I read the definition for trellises. We have yet to determine pergolas.
So you're saying you determined that this was a trellis?
No, I'm saying I read the definition for a trellis.
And that definition falls where?
In the definition, excuse me, I'm sorry. I want to make sure I just want to make sure before I respond. Yes.
153.080B4.
153.083.
080B4.
Yes. Yep, yep.
So we still don't have a definition of what pergola is. And that could be a fancy word for it for us, just like pergola is a fancy word for 3 Bs, correct? So same thing, just a fancy name.
I'm not saying that, no.
Counselor, the definition of trellis says it's detached from the building. Is what we're discussing right now detached from the building, or is it connected to the building?
It would be considered detached as an accessory structure.
We were provided information that it's attached.
A trellis or pergola would be an accessory structure, correct?
What I'm saying is the structure that now exists on this site is attached to the house.
It is attached to the house. However,
Attached means it's secured to the building. It is secured to the building, is that correct?
Dublin City Code for accessory structures, 153.074B2A, for the determining of attached. It has a roof with similar design to the principal structure.
We're not calling this an accessory structure. That's the whole point.
But you just told me that it was a structure.
It is a structure. It doesn't mean it's an accessory structure. There's two different things.
So what's the difference between a structure and an accessory structure?
A structure is a part of the principal structure. It's attached to the principal structure. And if I'm understanding correctly, I believe this is attached to the structure itself.
Let's look at the accessory structure section 153.074B2, detached accessory structures. Things that don't have the square footage of detached accessory structures include solar panels, gazebos, trellises, and arbors, or other open and unenclosed structures.
That's just to identify what's incorporated in square footage.
But it's saying that it's a detached accessory structure, and then that section further goes forward to define what fence, open fence section.
If your original statement is that based on the Webster's Dictionary of open,
You didn't have the Webster's Dictionary, which would be the original interpretation of open and unclosed.
this is your statement as part of the testimony. Your definition that you provided, let me share the screen. The 5 components, and again, this is not driven by staff, this is part of the applicant statement. The first, having no enclosing or confined barriers accessible on all or nearly all sides. Second component, completely free from concealment, exposed to general view or knowledge. Third component, not covered with a top, rougher lid. Fourth, having no protective covering. And 5, presenting no obstacles to passage of view, not enclosed, obstructed, or filled with objects.
So you're saying based upon the definition. Because I don't use my definition of open.
No, I would disagree. I would say that both of those instances are correct. The city of Dublin, have never used this code provision for anything that's not completely open. So that's the first part of your question. The second part is, do I agree with your assessment that it meets this definition? And I do not.
And even under the provisions for the accessory structures, which talks about specifically trellises and other open and unenclosed structures, a trellis would not.
Again, that provision is just to measure what's accountable space.
Would a trellis ever be considered open and uncovered under your definition and application in this particular case?
No.
So why in the accessory structure section do you compare trellises to other open and unenclosed structures?
Because it's,
Together in that whole section as being all similar type of structures.
because it's counted towards the buildable space that you can have for structures. It's counted towards the space. That's the only reason why it's in that section.
It's counted towards the square footage.
Mhm.
But it doesn't count towards the square footage because it's open and unenclosed.
Counsel, while she's looking that up, are you telling us that it's your belief that this structure meets your definition of open? It doesn't have a roof, top, or lid, has no protective covering, it doesn't have any obstacle to passage or view, it's completely free of concealment? Because she's saying that. Are you telling us you believe it meets that? Well, that's what I'm asking. You're telling me it doesn't have a top on it or lid or any covering over top of it? Okay, I didn't ask if it provides protection from the weather. We're attorneys too, so I'm not, it's not a game for me. This is, does it have a lid or covering on top of it, yes or no? So the picture we have with the awning pulled over it is not there. That's the wrong picture.
No, it's got what's called a canopy, but it would not,
The canopy that's covering the top of it?
it doesn't fall under the definition of roof covering.
I would agree with that if you look at the building codes as it pertains to roofs. and the roofing systems. It's a non-porous surface, it's shingles, it's metal. This comes up in my job, working for a builder. So I would agree with that. And I didn't think that the awning in and of itself was even a subject of open and uncovered. It's the pergola structure, right? It's the pergola.
Yeah, in their application, they're referencing the pergola, so I attempted to direct our analysis to the pergola. In this instance, they are including the awning, so it is part of their proposal. They've not told us otherwise.
That awning is not a roof system. It's a
Well, the question,
porous
I didn't ask about
fabric.
roof system. I used his own definition. Did it have a cover on top of it? He said no.
I heard roof, so I just wanted to jump in there.
Well-
It's not a roof.
It's not a roof. I used his own definition if there was a cover on top of it, and he said no. Anyone can look at it. There's a cover on top of it. No question about it.
Is that awning affixed to the pergola, though? Is this awning part of the pergola?
I'd have to defer to the applicant. I don't know the construction details.
There are cables that are alongside of the solid structures that are on the trellis that the awning. There are cables that are along where call them the joists, for lack of easier definition. That's where this canvas opens and closes. Similar to the retractable awning that staff hasn't figured out how to deal with a retractable awning. Is that permanent, or does the awning section and encroachment only apply to retractable awnings or permanent awnings? Does it apply to both? There's ambiguity that's in that.
The joists are permanent though, right? The joists that are across the top of it,
The
uncovering
joists
it.
are permanent, yes.
That even if the awnings weren't there, would protect to some extent from the sun because they're vertical, providing some amount of shade.
In this particular case, they provide very minimal amount of shade, if any, because of it facing in the easterly direction.
I just want to make sure real quick. Is the awning permanently affixed to the pergola?
It's permanently affixed to the pergola. It is not permanently extended over it. Like
You're
like
saying
a
it
typical
can.
awning you would see where it's
Right.
attached onto a building. And there's a difference between an awning and a canopy. An awning is attached onto a building, and its structure is the building itself. A canopy is attached to the building, but also has generally outside stanchions and posts and things like that. So there's a slight difference. We don't have that definition clear in our zoning code. You'd have to look at the building code to see that there's differences between those two.
If you would, oh, is that an image of it? Okay.
Very minimal. I'm gonna have to ask you to step back. Once you grab this phone, again, we can't look at that
Oh,
because it's.
We can use our discretion to look at it. We can't, if we want to.
That's true. I imagine though there's probably a photo similar to that within,
It's in the packet we have,
in the packet, right?
right?
but
Right
it doesn't have,
there.
so we
It's
can
a really
see,
large structure covering the whole top of it. It's right there.
and you can see the distance between the beams. Is-
I know she was still looking up something. I know you were still asking questions, so I don't want to dissuade you from doing that. I know we kind of cut you off a little bit while she was looking something up. Tammy,
So you're correct. It shall not be counted, but the purpose of the section is to differentiate what's counted towards and what's not counted towards square footage.
Correct.
I
But
apologize.
because I don't have a definition of open and uncovered, and I don't have a definition of open or covered in our zoning code, if I look at the entire zoning code itself and look at where things are applied, in this particular section, you're lumping trellises in with other open and unenclosed structures. Correct?
No.
You're not? It doesn't say trellises and other open and unenclosed structures?
For the purposes of square footage only. It's not defining anything.
It's,
And the reason why it's not.
I didn't say it was defining it. I said you're including trellis and gazebos, which actually have roofs over them, in with other open and unenclosed structures when it comes to whether it's adding square footage or not. So you're saying that a trellis in that particular section doesn't apply to the square footage because it's just like other open and unenclosed structures.
No, we're simply saying it doesn't count towards the square footage. That's what I'm saying.
And other open and unenclosed structures don't count towards square footage.
It's an example of what's not considered counted towards the square footage.
Okay, so, and also other open and unenclosed structures.
And other examples that were provided in that section, yeah.
Okay, so a patio is open and unenclosed, correct?
Yes,
Is a patio a structure?
yes.
How is it a structure?
It's permanently attached to the ground.
But is it set up as a truly definition of a structure under the zoning code?
Yes.
It's hard and paved surface.
So the definition of structure, so we're in the definition section 153.002. EE is the section, structured, anything constructed or erected, the use of which requires permanent location on the ground or attachment to something having permanent location on the ground, including advertising signs, billboards, mobile homes on a permanent foundation, and other construction or erection with special function or form except fences or walks.
So a walk is not included in the definition of a structure?
True.
And isn't a patio just simply a wider walk? It's a concrete slab on grade?
That's not how we've applied it, no.
Do you agree that the definition isn't necessarily clear as far as how that applies to a patio?
No, I think it's perfectly clear. It's permanently erected to the ground.
What makes a patio versus a walk?
I think walk implies movement. A patio is somewhere that you're meant to be stationary. A walk is somewhere that you're meant to walk somewhere.
I would agree with that, sorry.
So what was the definition that was provided by the board member?
A walk implies movement, so a walk would be somewhere that somebody is moving to another place, like walking down a path, whereas a patio is somewhere that's meant to be utilized for stationary activities, like sitting on a porch. But that is not, well, I do not know, or if that is defined in the code.
So I wouldn't need to get a permit for a walk. I could have a walk within the required rear yard setback 20, 30 feet into it, correct?
You would have to get a permit for a sidewalk. There's different spacing requirements. It's actually required to be 3 feet.
Would I be allowed to have a sidewalk in the required rear yard setback at, say, 20 feet into it?
Yes, like I said, it would be required 3 feet separation from a property line.
Okay, but if I put it 20 feet back from the back of the house and I'm 3 feet in from the side yards and the rear yard, I would be allowed to do that.
Yes.
Would it seem strange that I would have a sidewalk that I could build back there? Is there a limitation on the width of the sidewalk?
I don't believe the zoning code, there might be limitations for the building code, but I couldn't say for certain.
And to my knowledge, the building code doesn't address sidewalks. It's not required to have a building permit for a sidewalk. So I could theoretically build a,
But they do have width requirements, at least in terms of ADA accessible. There are width requirements.
the ADA would not apply to a private residence,
We said
not a
sidewalk.
place of public accommodation.
You were talking about a sidewalk. We didn't differentiate between residential or commercial. I'm just clarifying that there are width requirements.
Well, the ADA doesn't apply to private residences, so there is no regulations in the building code for sidewalks.
We can agree to disagree.
So I could, let's assume that it meets a 1 to 48 ADA definition for flatness from the building code regulation. At the Hopkins, I could build a 15-foot wide by, now let's say, within the 3 feet width from the side yards, I could build a 15-foot by 30-foot sidewalk.
I think that we would question that being used as a walkway to the point that it's not being, that doesn't sound like that's a path of movement. That's a usable space.
They could walk on it, they could walk around their backyard on it.
That's not the primary purpose of it, and I don't think that's how we'd interpret it.
You don't have a definition for walkway.
I would still challenge it.
Members of the Board of Zoning Appeals, the particular section that was cited as being open and uncovered, it says specifically open and uncovered porches. Those definitions aren't within this code. It's vague. It needs to be corrected. This issue has come up in the past from various different things on how to apply this particular section of the code. Is a trellis open and uncovered? I say that a trellis is, because if you look at how it's lumped in with other open and uncovered structures in various sections of the code, it could be considered open and uncovered. It doesn't take and detract visually. It's actually falls under the fence code section of our code as far as where it talks about arbors and trellises that's in there, and states that in that section it's 50% open. So we have a situation where I think you're going to see these more and more where people have outdoor living spaces and outdoor spaces that they're wanting to utilize. And whether it be a trellis, whether it be a gazebo, whether it be a covered porch, which is typically a raised element, not a flat element like a patio, there's distinctions between it. Staff's interpreting this as being this patio, which was permitted in and of itself, is now a porch, and because it has a trellis over it, which again I say can be interpreted as being a part of that lumped in open and uncovered element because it is not a attached structure.
Real quick, one question for you. You keep saying it's a trellis. It's not a pergola?
A pergola and a trellis are in essence the same thing.
Well, I'm going to use pergola because in the documents that you submitted about the system in question, it mentions pergola. I'm just going on what you submitted, the pergola. So that was in the documentation.
The manufacturer calls it a pergola. If you look at other definitions of places that have definitions of pergola, a pergola is an arbor formed of horizontal trellis work supported on columns or posts over which vines or plants are trained. It's a colonnade. So pergola includes arbor in the definition. It includes trellis within that definition. Again, it's a fancy word for a trellis, just like haricot vert is a fancy word for green beans.
In your letter to the city on December 6th, you actually referred to it as a pergola. You said you're writing regarding the pergola that it was installed, correct? You didn't call it a trellis anywhere in that letter?
Correct. We're calling it a pergola just because that's what is called from the manufacturer. If the board wants to have discretion, I actually have a state licensed registered architect that's familiar with architectural terminology and definitions of these type of elements. If you want to hear from her as far as, you know, what a trellis is, what a pergola is, what a gazebo is, I'm more than willing to ask her questions as far as what architectural terminology is, particularly even when it comes to patios and porches.
I'm okay right now. I just wanted to clarify. You kept saying trellis, and I was, just to be honest, a little confused because the documentation mentions pergola. I know you think it's a distinction without a difference. That's fine. I'm just going off what was provided.
I believe at one point even staff mentioned the word trellis in this particular case, and they've also in their staff report mentioned that open and uncovered patios are permitted per the zoning code section of 151B1C. The section says open and uncovered porches. It doesn't say open and uncovered patios. So there's ambiguity that's in it, and quite honestly, it needs to be clarified. It needs to be addressed so that it's clear. I don't believe this section and how it's being applied, where they may be applying it consistently, but I don't think their interpretation based upon everything else that's in the code is correct in how trellises and pergolas and other open and unenclosed structures are defined or have the zoning code applied to them. So, and you're going to have this situation, again, to address how this got here, they purchased this pergola from a manufacturer. They went through the process. They got approval from their homeowners association, who looks at whether or not it meets the PUD requirements and the other stuff. So they saw the pergola. They saw the canopy structure, the canvas structure as part of that. They saw the site plan showing that it encroached 5 feet into the rear yard setback, and they issued an approval. The homeowners association issued an approval, said, yep, it meets the criteria. They went back to the manufacturer, said, okay, we got our homeowners association approval. Do we need to get building permits on this? You're the one that's installing this. They were told they didn't need to get a building permit, okay? They followed the person that probably should know, being the installer, that said you didn't need the permit. It got installed, and it was a neighbor who turns out has the retractable awning that is now the question before the staff that made the complaint that this pergola went up. There's other issues between these two neighbors from when my client's house was built, and wanted some other issues taken care of, and so they don't get along from that standpoint. But at that point, that's when my client applied for the building permit, went through that whole process. So it wasn't that they did it with the idea of taking and tried to skirt the regulations. They got approval. They got the homeowners association approval, who they in essence agreed. Now, granted, they're not the city authority, but they in essence agreed that it was allowed to encroach into this rear yard setback under the PUD requirements. So they considered that it wasn't a covered porch or fall within the provisions that it wasn't allowed. They said that it was allowed.
We have in the record 2 public comments that say that the installed pergola was not built according to the plan submitted to the HOA. So not just from the neighbor who disagrees with, that you mentioned previously, they have outstanding beef, but also from another neighbor. Do you have what was submitted to the HOA originally that we can look at?
Can I comment on that as well? Again, that would go to what Jason brought up earlier, was the homeowner's paperwork submitted in the public comments. I'm not looking at them, and I don't believe that the city's interpretation has anything to do with what the neighbors think of it. I mean, I can tell you right here, I'm reading the letter Mr. McCash wrote and references his own definitions. A pergola is an arbor with a covered roof. Covered, the word covered is in this. It's referenced throughout all this paperwork. It says covered. It's your own letter. It's what your own definition is what says it's covered. You said, you gave the having no barrier. Picture had a barrier on top of it. Completely free from concealment. Not partially free, completely. You acknowledge there's beams on top of it. There's, I think there's fabric on top of it. Not covered with the top roof or lid. It is covered with the top roof and lid. Having no protective covering. Has protective covering. You reference in here that your client has skin cancer, so he wants to be protected from the sun. Presenting no obstacle to passage or view. We actually have a video, or a photograph where you look up and it's obstructed. Your own letter defines all these terms, and you say this is how it should be defined, and yet the information we have supports that. And you give us the definition, and you propose, based on the City of Phoenix definitions, that open and uncovered should be 75%. To me, and I bring this up to the fellow board members, uncovered means not covered. 75% would be partially covered. The interpretation is not open and partially covered, or I'd completely agree with you.
But the language isn't entirely open and entirely uncovered either.
Uncovered means without a cover. So if there's part of a cover, you're not uncovered. That's a clear definition to me. Do you guys agree with that?
Depends on what your definition of cover is, though.
Well, I'm using yours, sir, and your definition says without a top roof. Using your own proposal says without a top, no cover on top. We have a picture looking up. You give us definitions that don't comply with what you're asking us to do. It doesn't make sense. Your own letter says down. No, I don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you the homeowner?
Yes.
I think he stood up. Yeah, please feel free. I think she stepped up.
Wait,
Please go to the microphone.
Yeah. Go ahead. Hold
just
on 1 second.
I'm Mr. Hopkins.
Mr. Hopkins, 1 second, please. Tammy?
I'm not sure, Mr. Hopkins, did you
I did not.
swear?
You
Did
want
you
me
swear
to?
in?
He did.
I think he did.
Okay, I was just asking.
I swear.
Okay.
So, number one, I want to apologize for not getting the permit. That's on me. I was no intent to deceive or anything, but naivety, whatever it is, I'm responsible. I should have known better. What Mr. McCash said was true, that the HOA did say it was approved. It was approved. The initial comment that it was not what we submitted, they said it was polyvinyl something or PVC or plastic. It wasn't. It's aluminum. The pictures that she showed are correct. It has an awning or a canopy. It is retractable. You talked earlier about a retractable awning versus, is that covering? There's some discrepancy there. She showed pictures of it closed, if you will, the awning extended. I have pictures when it's retracted. There's 2 posts. There's 5 on a span of 20 feet. There's 5 spaces. Joists. If you look at it, it's not covered, it's not, and it is opened. If you look at these pictures, she's presenting one picture. If you're allowed to have a retractable awning, that's a retractable awning.
Yeah, but it's on the structure. It's not on the house, I think, which is the differentiating thing. Real quick, the other thing I want to state is I understand that you had hired this contractor to come in and they didn't get the appropriate permits. No, we have had people testify before that that's what happened. Their application then was essentially a retroactive variance request. And that's not what this is though. So that, I just want to be clear that aspect of reliance of what your contract did or did not say with the installer, whether they were obligated to get.
Accepting responsibility.
I'm not saying that's the responsibility. Sometimes that you may have believed that was their responsibility and that may be accurate. But what's the issue before us is not a retroactive variance request. It's a challenge of an administrative appeal, or I guess, excuse me, it's an administrative appeal of a decision made by the city with regard to open and uncovered.
And that's all I'm asking to acknowledge that what I consider that it is open and it is uncovered, and that you look at that picture.
And Mr. Chair, just on clarification, we did file this as an appeal or as a variance before, and staff directed us to come before you as an administrative appeal that perhaps would be better for not only the applicant, but perhaps for the board to hear some of the issues and concerns on what this, how a trellis type structure and some of this stuff applies in current day as opposed to when this code was originally written back in, Tammy, I want to say 76, I think was when this section was originally.
So just to be clear, I'm the one that made the suggestion, and that was purely based on the applicant's statement it didn't suggest that it didn't meet, that it had a practical difficulty. It challenged the fact that the applicants believed it to be open and uncovered. So we made that advice based on the applicant's statement.
And that's what all I asked you.
You would agree that those, let's call them joists, if I were trying to pass, let's say, a 4-foot log, not turning it straight up, it would hit something, right? If I was holding it long.
I don't know that it would. It's 20 feet and there's 5 panels. Those are 4
Okay,
foot.
if it's 20 feet long, a 20-foot long log, and I want board, I want to lift it straight up, it hits something, right?
And there's 5 panels.
But if I had a 20-foot long board, we were both holding one end and we lifted it up, it hit something, right? Is that true?
Yes. 3'6", it would not hit anything.
Okay, but 20 feet it would. So this says, your own attorney's letter says there is no obstacle to passage. You just acknowledge there's an obstacle to passage.
It depends on what you're trying to pass.
No, it doesn't. That's not what your letter says. Again, I'm using your letter. Your letter says no obstacle.
There's no obstacle to passage.
Well,
I mean, I cannot pass.
I'm at the point where I'm ready to vote. We've heard more than enough.
Well, I would like to say something. I know you guys are all fired up, but
Well, no,
I think
go ahead, Sarah, that's fine.
I think we're making this almost too difficult, and you've already made your decisions, so maybe we should just move on. But here's what I think. Here's what I think when I looked at this, and I read the city's. Frankly, I really don't take the city's explanation or the applicant's explanation. I just kind of applied my own, knowledge, experience, and what we're supposed to do as members of this committee. And I look at this and I think planning says that a pergola is not accessible on all sides as it is attached. And you stated during your statements that it was not accessible on 3 sides because it was attached. Now, I mean, I look at that and I'm thinking it's definitely accessible on 3 sides. In fact, it's accessible from the home on the 4th. So, I mean, stuff like that. I just was looking at this and I think, okay, this is like overcomplicating this. And, at least in terms of what we've done in the past, we've looked at the code. There's been some stuff that's not defined in the code. Open is not defined. Uncovered is not defined. Porches are not defined, though some codes in Central Ohio do, in fact, define porches and define patios. And when you look at some of them, like Westerville, and I look at their definition of porch, which is a unenclosed, unscreened, roofed permanent projection, supported by beams and piers, right? And I look and I say, okay, well, let's pretend that's our definition. And I put it up here, open and uncovered porches. To me says it's a porch without a roof, which to me then goes to the building code because that's where mine goes. And I think, okay, well, it's not a roof because it's not a non-porous surface and it's not, shingles and stuff like that. And so I'm trying to, that's the way, I'm just telling you guys, that's kind of the way I processed this. And I thought this, I'm frankly shocked that the conversation has gone this long because I thought this was going to be well, this is clearly open and uncovered. It's got a non-permanent, porous, retractable awning that, probably isn't up 3/4 of the year. And that's kind of where I fell on this. So you know where I stand.
So just to that point, a couple of things. And I think the applicant alluded to this. So the board can make a determination, and if part of that determination is that our code needs more clarification, that can be part of your recommendation. So that's clearly something that I've heard as a comment.
Clearly we need to have pergola somewhere in the code. And to me, a pergola is open and uncovered because even if you're sitting under, because my my father and mother-in-law have a pergola that I bought them with a retractable awning, you're getting wet. You're getting sun. It is not this I would still wear a hat if I were you and you're worried about skin cancer. This isn't like a protection or a cover. It really, and to me, it really is closer to a trellis or an arbor, to be honest with you. That's kind of where I fall. And we definitely, given, driving around my neighborhoods, there's tons of pergolas in Dublin and we don't have a definition. And I think that it's crying for it, particularly now when people are spending a lot more time at home and we're getting a lot more variances for people wanting to spend more time in their backyard because no one wants to leave their house anymore. I would love that to be a recommendation that comes out of tonight.
So just to further my point, and we've acknowledged that they're not definitions. So when the applicant provided what we would classify as, and I apologize if this isn't the right terminology, but the common source of definitions, which is the Webster Dictionary, we reached out to our law director's office and said, is that an acceptable definition if we don't have one provided? And the answer was yes. So that's why we geared some of our conversation towards those definitions. I would be reluctant to start adopting or at least using other definitions from different cities because that's not part of our zoning codes.
To me, that's more, it's at least a definition that's adopted in the context of development, construction, building, and it's not just in a vacuum. What does Webster Dictionary say about it? So, that's kind of where I go when I at least advise my divisions, and we're dealing with these issues in other cities, and it's been helpful, and it's something that other city staffs and municipalities, this is a total side, will look to. So, and I'm certain when you look and to redo your code, you will look to other maybe cities and see what they're doing in terms of this definition. Now, whether that will be Arizona or Westerville, I don't know, but it makes sense to look at, not reinvent the wheel, I guess.
And that's fair, but I think it's important to know that we did flush that out with our law director's office.
And just for clarification, the reason I went to Phoenix's code is because we were dealing with a structure from shade type situation. I do a lot of work out in the Phoenix area. They have a lot more comprehensive definitions on things dealing with shade structures and other type elements and on that. Even a carport with a roof, if it's got two sides open, they consider that open and uncovered. Now, I wouldn't say that that's what we would want to necessarily adopt here, but they
Tough me not to use Phoenix, but I will tell you, I agree with what Sarah said in one part. I completely disagree. The word uncovered to me, I felt exactly the same way you did, but the opposite. Uncovered means without a cover. It's very simple to me. I don't know how you get to any other conclusion but that. But I will tell you this, I agree that there are numerous things that need to be fixed in this. And I appreciate Mr. McCash pointing them out. And I would ask the city to reach out to him because I know this isn't the only time he's been here doing this. And I'm sure he would say, here are some things that are problems that you need to fix. I don't want to volunteer you for that, but you've brought up reasonable points that I think need to be addressed. So don't take it that I'm a volunteer, but I think
12 years on council and suggested that we do a zoning code rewrite, but it just finances, staffing, timing, things like that didn't, never happened until I left council. So
What would be an open and uncovered porch then? What would that be? Would that be a patio? Because, if, I'm curious what you would think an open and uncovered porch would be.
A concrete slab with, at a maximum, 1.5 foot high walls around portions of it. It would, anything beyond that, and I would say.
a paver patio.
Yeah, paver
Doesn't
Then
have a
that's a
roof on it.
patio, is it not?
It is, and that's how we've applied it as open and uncovered. We've allowed minimal seating walls, but
Well, then
again,
why
it's-
doesn't this say patios may project?
We agree
telling
that
you
the
how to
definition
apply.
needs to be reworked, but in past cases here, we have had people who have had open and uncovered patios, which are literally just concrete pavers or something similar. They want to put up a pergola, and then we say, okay, no, that would be covered. We need to actually discuss this in the Board of Zoning Appeals. In these past cases, if they have that type of structure and then they want to put up a pergola, they have to come to us in order to get it approved because it would cover up that area.
That's what I was going to say, is that we had two a couple months ago. It's very similar to this.
Had like
where
6 in the
They had a
past.
patio and they had to get a variance to put the pergola up, and they were the same. It was barely anything over the top and a couple slats. I think they did. I recall that they did,
we
but
still have a pending variance application.
So
Right.
so just so you understand, that's what Jason was saying earlier. There's a big difference, and your attorney can explain this to you, between the variance, which is still pending, and this definition. This is not saying you will never or cannot get a variance for this. This is saying whether the determination by the city of open and uncovered was correct. There's a big difference between the two, in my opinion.
So the other thing I want to point out, going with what Sarah was saying, I think obviously there's been some areas that can be improved with regard to the code, right? I think that's fair. We've discussed that. But for me on this one, the awning makes a difference. If the awning wasn't there, I think I'm not saying I could be convinced, from a vote perspective. The awning is attached, and that then, in my opinion, it really reduces the fact of it being, if there was any argument for being uncovered, it squashes that, because that's what you want it for. You want the awning. That's the whole thing.
And especially based on the counselor's own definition that he got for open and uncovered, it clearly says without a top, and this clearly does have a top. And I agree we need to rewrite that section to better identify this stuff, but.
So let me just move on real quick. Let's figure this out. So we have an option here that we can move to vote if we have enough in support of voting, okay? There's also an option that we can recommend that the code is addressed or updated or further defined before making a decision. Is that correct, Tammy? Because I read this, what our abilities are here. The board may reverse or affirm or wholly or partially, or may modify the order, requirement, or decision or determination appealed from, or may make an order, requirement, decision, or determination as ought to be made, and to that end shall have all the powers of the administrative official or body from whom the appeal was taken. So we can direct to have the ordinances defined. And once that they're defined, then that solves that issue, that gap, and then we could come back, and then this essentially is stayed. We're allowed to stay it. The fact that it's appeals stayed, and the only way that it wouldn't be stayed is if the city would cause imminent peril to life or property. That's not the case. So essentially, that we could stay this would automatically be stayed while we go back and the ordinances are
Their variants still go forward. If we did something with this today, is there still a way that they can say, I want to go forward with my variance and get that approved? Would that be impeded at all by a stay?
So let me answer Mr. Deschler's question first. So yes, you could absolutely direct staff to redefine or look at this code. You could do that a couple of ways. You could actually vote on whether you affirm or disaffirm, is that a word? Our decision, and then with the caveat that we then look at the code and provide further definition. And you can get as specific as you want. Or you could just direct us to do a code update with the assumption that this would not be determined until the end of that process. The only caveat that I would say, and I've done probably, I would say 4 code modifications in the past year, and they are quite lengthy. They can, especially a code section like this that's complicated, they can get very lengthy. So that's
It
just.
can, but you know what it does? It doesn't impact the pergola with the awning. That's going to stay. It's not like they have to take it down in the interim or do anything, right? Because it stayed.
And that's my point, that I'm sorry, what was the other question? I didn't get to, sorry.
That's kind of what it was, does that stay code enforcement's ability to go tell them I'll just be clear, what I don't want to have happen, I'm not opposed to the stay part of this. I don't want to vote to stay this, and then code enforcement goes out tomorrow and tells them, hey, take this down. Because I don't know what the new definition is going to be. Maybe it fits in that. Or maybe they would choose to go through with a variance in the middle of this. I just want to make sure that that's not precluded. Is there also another option that, I guess a different one than Jason is, that we could say, we support we affirm the decision that was made, and we direct the city to go back and define all the terms that we talked about tonight that were not defined? Can we do that also?
You can do both of those.
Yeah, per the code, it says we can really do whatever we want. I mean, reading it.
If you guys do a code update, do you take public comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. There's multiple, it goes through the Planning and Zoning Commission and then to City Council.
I think that should be posted on all of the websites in Dublin so that people can make pergolas are very popular, make their thoughts known as to how that is affected. And given if we're going that way, I would prefer Jason's stay route, because that seems the fairest to the homeowner to see where they land on that definition, though,
I mean, you could come back. The definition means if.
Because if we deny it, then it's done.
It's done on this appeal, but it doesn't mean that they can bring the variance before us.
If the code is redrafted such that they don't, like, this falls within the new clarification is what I'm saying.
But that's so Tammy told us it takes a long time. So that means for the next year, we stay every case that has anything to do with this.
Yeah, but we've never directed them to fix the code before. I mean, then wouldn't you immediately start working on it, I would imagine, and go through that process? Yeah, it's time consuming, but it was time consuming to get from July to October to talk about 3 little words. So.
I mean, I'll tell you, having gone through that on council, it's a long process for staff to do it. And it could take a year. It could take, in some cases 2 years. We've had some code updates when I was on council that literally it took a while to do. So yes, your stay could last for 2 years. That's fine
Well, what is because we typically ask the applicant what, we take that into account, what they want. Of course, I am supportive of your definition, not the city's, but, that doesn't seem to matter. So, like, what would you want? Because that might, that's instructive sometimes.
I think there's kind of 2 issues that I think maybe that you're wrestling with. I do think that there needs to be code updates. Mm-hmm. I think that's why we kind of took staff's direction to come here on an administrative appeal as opposed to the variance, which is still pending. Technically, I guess we have 2 cases here. Could you finalize the Hopkins on a variance by granting a variance and then under the administrative appeal, say, hey, staff, we direct you to take a look at this and update code provisions, how those definitions come out a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever, they may or may not fit within that, which means if it does fit within it, then their variance is kind of moot because they fall within the section, but they've already been taken care of through the variance itself. Or you deny the variance and we wait for the administrative appeal and determination on what staff's updates of the code may be and whether they fall within it. I know, Mr. Nye, you're kind of looking there, kind of confused on that, but yeah, we do technically have two applications.
Yeah, I mean, the variances
The variance
before us,
isn't-
it's different because there would have to be probably somebody from the HOA that's going to have to go, that's a lot more backdrop. And as you saw here, the elements for proof are entirely different. There is a concern though, I don't know if I like, because people came with variance requests similar to this for pergolas, okay? Because that was the understanding is what they had to do. But if we would stay this, pending the open and obvious, in theory, that creates this however long until the city makes a determination on the code change, that those would just be in limbo, and they, in theory, could build something similar, and code enforcement really couldn't do anything, even though it was potentially in violation.
See, that's why I'm more in favor of the upholding the city's
Ruling,
definition
and
and then adding to that a requirement that they
Right.
define all these terms.
And then in the meantime, would they still be allowed to do a variance?
If somebody else came in, just to address your comment, if somebody else came in, they would have to, assuming they don't build it beforehand and come in, they apply for a permit, staff's still going to deny it based upon the current definition, their current application. They would then have to come do an administrative review here in which you'd say, no, we've stayed this until staff makes a definition. Pergolas aren't going to be built, trellises aren't going to be built because no permits are going to be issued on it.
It's not a referendum. The stay of action is based on the specific site, and I'll confirm this with our legal department, but it would be specific to the applicant. So if you play that scenario out, the worst case scenario is we put a stay on this application. It takes 1.5 years for us to draft a code modification, and in the meantime, other applicants come forward, let's say administrative appeal, or let's say variance, because they do have the same options. This board would have to make determinations on those.
But we're already making those determinations. How many pergola cases have we had in the past year?
But
Like
that's
half a dozen
correct. But for
almost.
this particular applicant, you would have a stay, so they would be able to wait for
Right,
that.
but if the problem that we've continued running into is we keep on running into this pergola issue. We keep on saying there needs to be something done about this pergola issue. We've done things like improve the visibility of the rear yard setbacks and what that means for people's buildable area. We've done some other things like that. But right now, we still keep on running into this problem that people want to build pergolas, and it may or may not be open and uncovered. It may or may not extend past the setback. If we say, hey, can you please fix this small piece of the code, figure out exactly what we want it to mean, and in the meantime, continue hearing the variances, how is that any different than us saying, well, we're just going to keep the code how it is, we'll continue hearing variances?
That's why I'm in favor of
The different,
affirming this, and then asking for them to change it. Because I think then we have dealt with this matter that's before us and then directed them to fix it going forward. And then it allows that variance request to run its course through us.
And in this case, can you redefine what approval means exactly?
Well, the way I interpret approval would be we're approving the city's determination as to what open and
It's affirming,
affirming, sorry. What did I say?
approving.
Okay.
I'm just,
Well-
I'm looking at the code language here.
Okay, so we would affirm the city's determination of what open and uncovered means to this application.
Okay, and then that would still allow the homeowners to go through with this particular variance request in this case, and any other people who build pergolas can also do a variance request.
That's what I understand. So would you be in favor of that then?
Yes.
I can tell you from, and there's no disrespect to staff, if you make a determination in this and give that direction to staff to fix the code, a lot of times what that does is it falls into the black hole of I'll eventually get to it. And 10 years from now, 15 years from now, they might get to it because other issues come in where if you placed a stay,
Doesn't this give
It
us
creates
discretion to put
emergency.
a time limit?
create more of an emergency
Yeah.
on staff to get it addressed.
Well, no, I mean, I think we can,
think that's fair.
we can set a time frame that it has to be done. It says that, it says, have all the powers of the administrative official and body of whom the appeal was taken. So we can direct the city within a reasonable time to have it done. How about that, Tammy? Isn't that exciting?
I mean, I think if you guys are being honest, a reasonable time probably is a year and a half.
No way.
to 2
I'd say 6
years.
months. That's reasonable. It's a city code. It's a couple sections.
Let me
I
tell you a
think
couple
that
stories.
You're,
Here's the thing. So if a board directs us to do a code amendment, it will happen. That's not the same as us walking out of this room and saying, what are we going to do tomorrow? And it's not on our list. So we do take credence to directions of our boards. We work for you. What I can't guarantee, because these are public processes and there are other boards that will hear these definitions. And again, I've done 4 of these this year. I can tell you they do get rather complicated quickly because everybody has different opinions, especially when you're using definitions. So I couldn't personally commit to a time frame because that's not something I can control. What I can commit to is that we would implement, we've already talked about the fact that this needs revisited. We wouldn't be here if it didn't need some level of scrutiny. So I would say that if you direct us to do that, it is a priority.
I agree with Sarah that like a year and a half does not seem overly long for this. 6 months does seem excessive. If we're trying to get input from a bunch of different people, then that seems like we don't give them enough time. But if we said a year and a half, then that's reasonable.
just these processes take a really long time, you guys, and realistic, real world. Like, I think even a year and a half is kind of like putting her on the fast track. And I think that you would probably agree, given you were former city council. I mean, you probably have some input into that.
It is, I can tell you it is a long process, and
Yeah.
like they say, you may
And
like
I mean, I
sausage,
disagree with your,
see sausage getting made.
I mean, I disagree with the definition of open and uncovered. So you can imagine when we pop in all these other people that get to opine, it gets complicated, and you have to, you have to consider all of that. So
It should.
oh, absolutely.
Well,
So it sounds like that we have agreement that something needs revisited. I guess my quandary or my hesitation is if we did put a stay on this particular application, and again, this is just the realities of an enforcement issue, it would be incumbent upon us to stay in contact with the applicants at the end of the process where we have a remodified code. And I'm not even saying it fixes the problem, because it may not fix the problem.
No, I think we're gonna, I'm not in favor of a stay. I'm in favor of affirming the city's decision. This is my take. And then, everybody else can go. I know Sarah, we are where Sarah is. I'm in favor of affirming the city's decision with respect to the open and uncovered decision, primarily because the awning is attached, in my opinion, and based on the prior history of other variances that have come in, they've had to ask for permission because it's not open and uncovered. So I think we do, in my opinion, we go that route with the affirmation, and then direct the city to update the code sections related to open and uncovered, pergola, trellis. We can further define that as needed.
And the stay at least allows my client to have the pergola remain until the city makes these updates and determine whether or not they meet it or not. Upholding the city's decision means, from my client's standpoint, were a 2506 appeal to the judicial system, which may or may not speed up staff even faster. Or it may end up.
Or the variance request goes through.
Or a variance request, one of the two.
Yep.
Yeah, where does this go if you appeal? Is it Franklin County?
Common Pleas General Division.
Yep.
It could be fun. Get the transcript out.
And when you start getting judges involved, they get some weird interpretations and definitions, so.
Well, at this point, I'm going to make a motion.
We could lose, the city could lose. If the city loses, then all of a sudden now there's all kinds of pergolas and stuff going in.
Yeah.
Sarah, can you
Yeah, what he's
reiterate why
saying
you would
is
like to
he's-
stay as opposed to?
I mean, I would honestly prefer the stay and then watch them go through the variance process, which I'm pretty sure that they probably may play that out. I don't know. It's not my decision, but I do think when you don't stay it and they appeal it, you do open it up to the judicial interpretation, and then the city loses control over the process too. If you have to think about that, I mean.
Well, at this point, I'm going to make a motion. I move that we affirm the decision and interpretation of open and obvious by the city, and that we direct the city to define the terms open, uncovered, pergola, patio, trellis. Any other ones anybody can think of?
Porches.
Porches. And we ask them to start that process.
I'll second it, but I don't know if we're going to have the votes. How's that work?
We have to table it, I would imagine.
No, if it's a 2-2, the opposite motion applies. So if your motion is to affirm, if it's a 2-2 vote, you disaffirm. I don't even know if that's a word.
I'm a no on that.
Hold on, we don't have roll yet. Timmy, 1 second. I don't mind the threat of being appealed. It's so many years of being a litigator. I don't really worry about that. What's the city's take on taking this to common pleas? I want to hear this. What's your position? You're not worried about it?
We're not hesitant to take, that's the proper step to the next channel. So that's not something, and our legal counsel knows that that's an option.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second.
So Robin, here's the deal. We know where we stand. If you vote no, they're going to be successful. And then that's going to open the door for open and uncovered.
Every pergola comes in.
If you say yes, then they're rejected. Their variance can still go forward. This will get appealed, and city's attorneys will deal with it from that standpoint. Can we call roll, please?
Thank you.
We have the motion. I think, and the real quick, I want to add on to that. I want to add on the motion with what Joe said. I want to make sure from a definition standpoint that there's a holistic view on all these issues brought out by the applicant, further definitions and in the appropriate code sections. So with that, roll, please.
Do I have a motion and a
We have a
second?
second. Yeah, we had the motion by Joe, and then I seconded it.
Okay. Mr. Deschler?
Yes.
Mr. Nye?
Yes.
Ms. Herbert?
No.
Mr. Clower?
Yes.
Okay, so with that, this case is done, and then we'll see what happens with a potential appeal and the upcoming variance application. Okay, we have next on the agenda the rules and regulations, Tammy. My understanding is this is an application for review and recommendation to City Council for proposed updates to the Board of Zoning Appeals rules and regulations.
Yes, thank you. So before you tonight is a set of amended rules and regulations. This is applicable to the Board of Zoning Appeals, although similar amendments have been proposed for the Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as the Architectural Review Board. The impetus to the changes is for the mayor to make a determination that based on illnesses or inability to attend meetings specifically related to the pandemic, that they're able to express the desire to do a virtual meeting. That's the first paragraph. The second and third paragraph is, again, at the mayor's discretion to determine whether a meeting could be wholly attended virtually, and if so, there's time requirements for those meetings. So it just gives some more parameters to virtual meetings. Obviously, this is on the cusp of the last couple of years that we've had, where we've had to be more flexible for public meeting processes, and this the recommendation from this board would then go to City Council. I will tell you, both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Architectural Review Board have approved the modifications with the request that we give further clarification to emergency, because that's the terminology that we've been provided. But again, a motion before this board would then go to City Council to adopt the new language in the rules and regulations. And of course, I'm happy to answer questions.
So I actually printed out the wrong ones and reviewed those. So would the emergency just be, first of all, have you fully defined that? And is it just related to pandemic? Because I think that having the meetings in person are the best thing for the applicants, the city, and just, our citizens in general that want to come speak. I think that Zoom is yeah, it's easy, but it's also not your day in court kind of thing. So I just want to, just out of clarity, that won't be used, just because, I don't know, it's snowy out or something.
They're saying in an emergency situation that the applicant can attend virtually.
I read it, Sarah, to also mean like if
Member.
say like the person who was, like you couldn't come a time, or if the applicant also had like a health issue or something, or they got stuck somewhere, that their case wouldn't be kicked out. That was the part I liked, because let's say their car broke down or something, they could potentially join via their phone, and that's kind of a weird way to do it, or they got stuck out of town and they couldn't get a flight back or whatever, they could still do it. So that part I like. I agree that we kind of have to know what the word, as we've learned tonight, definitions are really important. I think defining emergency is a good comment that the other boards made. So, I mean, I'm in favor of it. I think it's great to have the word emergency defined, but I don't think it'd be used all the time. I think it's a limited tool, but it's no reason not to have it.
I mean,
I agree. Do we need to have a motion or something?
yeah, I mean, the situation here is that there's an out if somebody can't make the meeting because of an emergency. That's really what it comes down to, whether it's the applicant or a board member, right?
Yeah, well, back to Ms. Herbert's point, it is supposed to be related strictly to COVID, although the policy does refer to emergency, and that's why the other boards have said we want more clarification on emergency. So that's already a directive from the other boards, and that will be part of council's considerations. So
my only comment would be, I think that they shouldn't limit it just to COVID. I agree with Sarah that they should be very carefully defined, but if there's a chance that you're not going to have quorum, I mean, to her point again, we're serving the public. If somebody's application can't go forward because, say, Sarah's on a flight and gets stuck and can't get here, if she could join virtually under that situation, I think, this requires an approval process, but I think that that'd be a good thing to be able to do that.
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, we can call a motion, but how do we direct for there to be further definition of emergency? Just do that in our motion?
So similar to what we just did, what the board could do is say that we recommend the rules and regulations as proposed by this draft language, with the caveat that council explore more definition of emergency situations.
Then I move to do exactly what you just said.
And furthermore, say that it should be a potentially broader version of emergency than just COVID, rather than narrowing it down to COVID.
I second whatever that was.
Roll, please.
Mr. Clower,
Yes.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Mr. Nye,
Yes.
Ms. Herbert.
Yes.
All right, so we're down to communications. And we have the proposed meeting dates. Sarah, do we know when your last meeting is?
I think it's next month, because I
March.
think April 2016, but I'll have to check.
Tammy, do we know if,
Check that.
do we know if council has anybody from an application standpoint? Not only, I mean, two questions. One, are we going to have a March meeting? Are we going to have a March meeting on the 24th as currently proposed?
There's a potential, yes.
Okay. And then second, do we have an applicant for the board position that's going to be replacing Sarah?
They have to publicly post that.
I thought they
Yeah,
did recently.
and typically they wouldn't involve planning in that
Okay.
review process.
That's
so they-
fine. What I didn't want to do is commit to these when we're going to be switching, but I understand that Ann Alicia's not here, but I know that's,
Could we commit to just March and then,
I mean, I was thinking that maybe the next couple. Look, the other thing is, there's problems here anyway. October 27th, I thought we mentioned this last time. That's just a no-go because of Beggars Night in
Right.
Dublin.
Yeah.
And then,
March 24th is spring break.
well, no, it doesn't start till
It's my spring break.
the 26th. What, 25th? The 26th
28th is a Monday.
in Dublin, right?
Oh, it does start
Yeah, it's a week later.
to the 26th. You're right.
Yeah. I was like, wait, where do you live? Okay. You live in Hilliard? How's that possible?
So there's what we could do, because we keep kind of running into this, and we do when we schedule these meetings, and we have lots of meetings, we try to work around all the obvious
Yeah.
things. What you could do is adopt either all the dates or some of the dates, and then if it gets to a potential date where we're fearful of not having a quorum, then we
Right.
can cancel a meeting.
I'd say let's, I mean, look at these other ones. These other ones fall around when they would normally fall. Maybe we just do it to July or something. Do half the.
Yeah, because we keep on running to the problem where we don't have enough people to verify it. So if we're just doing 1 month, then that's going to be problematic if we don't have enough people.
Why don't we do, I'm going to move. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do a motion to approve the meeting dates from March 2022 through July 2022.
I'm going to second that.
Roll, please.
Ms. Herbert,
Yes.
Mr. Deschler,
Yes.
Mr. Clower,
Yes.
Mr. Nye.
Yes.
And if there are no further questions or comments, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.